Hey everybody, Jester Borris here with I Want to Be a GM, and this is Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realms, Faerun. Welcome, and I want to introduce everyone who's joining us today. To my right,
I'm Quinn the Fighter.
and then on the other side of the table, we've got...
I'm Troy, the Planescape guy, and our special guest today is Katie, the DM, and we're going to be talking about Forgotten Realms. We brought her in today because she runs a game based in Forgotten Realms. She does a lot of her additions and special tweaks in her game, all within Forgotten Realms. So she has a very unique perspective that we look forward to discussing with her. So since we're going to go through the realms, we're going to talk about Forgotten Realms and all the things that it includes. We got to start at the very beginning.
Before that, say hi, Katie.
Hi, guys.
So, that's for sure. Forgotten Realms was the third major world setting after Greyhawk and Dragonlance, written by Ed Greenwood a long, long time ago. So tell us a little bit about how that came to be, Troy.
So you can find this article on D&D Wiki, on the interwebs somewhere.
Interwebs.
The Forgotten Realms is a fictional alternate world that has been published as a campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons. It's this game a lot of people are playing. I don't know if you've heard it or not. The setting is also referenced in the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons core books, though it has not yet been published as its own separate setting. It was originally created in 1967 as a setting for short stories by Ed Greenwood, and it has since become one of the most enduring campaign settings ever. The primary focus of the setting is the continent of Faerun, part of the world of Abertoril,
Aber.
an Earth-like planet with certain obvious influences and similarities from the real world and fantasy fiction. The Forgotten Realms setting owes a lot of its popularity to the many novels that use the setting, such as R.A. Salvatore.
Yes, R.L. Stein, famous for their D&D books.
R.A. Salvatore's works detailing the life and adventures of the famed drow Drizzt Udurin. Did I get that one?
No.
As well as computer games such as Pool of Radiance, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, and Neverwinter Nights. What? I got that one.
You did get that one.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
For the most part.
All I had to do was read it, and I still can't do it.
Did you say all of the words?
Mostly.
Is it knights or knights?
Knights, I think, if you're going
Most
with
of the words, at
Most
least.
of the words. So it started in 1967 as a background for short stories, and they became popular in you were talking about this earlier a minute ago. So in 1986,
1986, TSR approached Ed Greenwood and asked if they could basically have the Forgotten Realms, and he sold all the rights to them. In 1987, they published the first campaign books in the Forgotten Realms actual box set.
Yeah, so what would be known as the gray
Very
box.
nice.
Yeah,
it's always the gray box. Yeah.
And so it had 2 books, and then it had 4 full-color maps in it. And then in 1988, R.A. Salvatore published The Crystal Shard.
Also, you have heard of this guy.
Only once or twice. It may be how I, came into the Forgotten Realms was through this book.
Nice.
Yeah, so originally Ed Greenwood used his setting for his short stories, found Dungeons and Dragons with a white box, set his games in his world setting of Faerun, published a lot of articles in Dragon Magazine, which is how TSR found him. And then, as Katie said, he sold the setting to TSR, and they've developed it from there. R.A. Salvatore, Crystal Shard, Drizzt has appeared in over 17 novels from there.
Yeah.
Board games, video games, the whole slew of things.
Yeah, it's gotten kind of out of hand.
No, it's actually been pretty awesome.
I mean,
So
there's
we've
a
got
lot of books.
The first edition. Let me double check it here. Yeah, so we got Encyclopedia of the Realms, which was this book here.
Yep.
It was very cool.
In the original
And
original release box set, 1988,
Yeah,
became known as the gray box set.
Yeah, Mr. Producer, if you could pull up the other one, it's the FR2E campaign set. It's gonna be that book right here. You could show that for our viewers at home. That's the Sword Coast Adventurers guide.
Yep.
So we have done a lot of research and prep for this today's story, today's event.
We have. He hasn't.
Yeah. He's trying to fill
there
in
we
the
go. So yeah.
There it is. There
yeah,
it is.
So that's the campaign, or this would be the DM's. Oh, it's why is it going to be red text on gray? Yeah, the DM source book of the realms. And then what you're showing there is actually the first hardback that we got for second edition.
Yes. And this is not so much as an update or a reprint, but it's additionally to these two books from the original box set, which is one of the things I like about this. There's just tons and tons of material.
Yeah. So and TSR, the Forgotten Realms was the third after Greyhawk and Dragonlance.
Yeah.
And so it was just the next release as TSR sought to expand their list of offerings for world settings, and it's proved to, Troy mentioned, to be quite enduring. Late in second edition, when Wizards of the Coast took over TSR, they scaled back a lot of the worlds that they had been printing. We had several by the end of second edition that were out there, and focused on just a couple, and Forgotten Realms, with the launch of third edition, became the official setting for the official books. And it's been that way since third edition forward.
Pretty much every fifth edition book you get now, I'm sure you've seen. Here, shows a couple that you brought today.
Well, I've got with me Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus.
Baldur's Gate. I think I've heard that place.
Have you? Well, it's featured in quite a few video games. Quite a lot of stories, as the nefarious city of blood and lies, better known as a cesspool.
Never before have you seen such a collection of scum and villainy.
Who is this lovely lady on the cover?
Oh, that's just a demon.
Actually, no. This is Zariel.
Yes.
She is the archdemon of Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus. She's one of the main antagonists, if you will, for it. I can't give too much away if you're intending to play it, though. It's a very tricky situation.
To be fair, I am not.
So this one has another name I notice here. It says Waterdeep.
Yes, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. The story for that one, you are looking to pull off a great heist.
Yeah.
It has some interesting sliding bits to it. You can rearrange, depending on the seasons, who the villain is.
That is interesting.
Depending on the season.
Yep.
Yeah, the way the book is written is quite interesting. You have different seasons. It's meant to be played over a long period.
Yeah.
And you can insert other Waterdeep or Faerun material into the middle of that module.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. You can change up who the villain is so you never play the same game.
Yeah.
Actually,
Since you're in Waterdeep, if you
legitimate.
wanna get sidetracked by going and getting lost on the Undermountain, you can.
Can I go get lost trying to find a Starbucks?
Can you get lost right now?
Ouch. Tough crowd.
Especially if you're trying to find a Starbucks
So
on the Death
it's
Star.
in Waterdeep.
But-
He was talking about the Undermountain.
Yeah.
Undermountain takes place just outside Waterdeep, or is it under Waterdeep?
Underwater Deep, technically.
Well, it's
in 5th edition.
Yes, actually, they did move it.
Yes.
How
So
do you move something like that? I mean,
well, in
Magic.
this original write up, it was actually in the mountain next to Waterdeep, because Waterdeep's sort of in a valley.
Mhm.
But in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which took Undermountain and Generous from there, we'll show that in a little bit. You access that dungeon from within the city, and so you're below the city before you get into the rest of all the nonsense.
Quite literally through the yawning portal.
Yeah.
yes. So, the Ruins of Undermountain is another one that came out in second edition, way back when, and they've re-released it as the not truly a re-release, but a retelling of, I guess you could say. But the Ruins of Undermountain has many, many, many levels and many, many rooms per level. And as it's written, there are several hundred rooms per floor, so much so that only a third of the dungeon is actually described.
Mhm.
and it is meant for the intention of the dungeon master to fill in the rooms as they see fit, in keeping with your overall story or theme of what kind of destruction your players are doing in the dungeon. It starts off as a, hey, you guys look like you might want to have some fun, or intro your party however you see fit to their own death, and then they go down a well, and they wind up in the dungeon, and it is quite literally layers and layers and layers. And the further you go in, the deadlier things become.
Yep.
As you do.
Is it the Mad Mage that has the Beholder?
Yeah, so that's level 6 or 7. Shadowport, Xanathar, the Beholder, runs the Thieves Guild.
Yeah.
I don't want to run to that one.
That's like he can just float around enough with what's down there that he runs the Thieves Guild. It's not
Right.
like, oh, a Beholder, we have to kill it. You're like, it's a Beholder. Go see him if you need something.
Yeah.
So
It's our boss.
yeah.
That is the guy with the goldfish, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sweet.
But
I got that right.
ultimately, what we're talking about here, Faerun Forgotten Realms has a ton of material. Over 20 modules released in first edition, another 20 adventure modules for second, a handful, about 8 I think it was for third edition. Fourth edition only had 3, but now back in the 5th edition, like 80% of the content is set somehow in the Forgotten Realms, particularly Faerun. And we'll detail a little bit here some of the realms or settings outside of Faerun, because it's the world of Toril actually has quite a lot that was added to it as it went on. But to include here, Tor's got the city system.
This is also set in Forgotten Realms, and it has detailed descriptions of Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate,
Baldur's Gate.
Baldur's
I think
Gate.
never
Baldur's
remember
Gate.
what was the other one.
several others, about 12 or 15 of the larger cities that are described in great detail with maps. And it's to me is such a resource. I've used it over the years. Whenever I needed a large city, you just pull out the book. Here's your map, and you just change the name of the place, and you got a great big city. I've used it many times for that kind of thing. So another tremendous resource, even today with 5th edition. Those of you who play strictly 5th edition, a lot of this older material you can find on eBay or even some places that do reprints. And all you have to do when you run into a monster, you pull out your 5th edition monster manual, ta-da,
Yep.
Yep.
and you just keep on going.
It's a 1-on-1.
Great stories, and you can just change the monsters and have a good time with them.
So that's just a little bit here about what we've got for Forgotten Realms. Let's talk a little bit about how, like, Faerun is just part of it, as I mentioned.
All the books.
All of the books. Well, so we start here. We've got the second edition gray box. Stop it.
It's the one that I like.
Yeah, you'll like all of them because they're awesome. But we got a update to the gray box. We got a Grand Tour of the Realms. Book of Layers is not part of that. And Shadowdale.
That's the one I was interested in.
Damn it, Quinn.
Layers are cool. Villains with layers.
No. But this expanded or updated some of the Forgotten Realms information that we had. Will you stop touching things?
I'm gonna touch what I want.
Yeah, that's weird.
I'm just looking at it.
And that's why Quinn's no longer allowed to go back to the art museum.
So,
Well,
the Horde lands, which have been referenced in some of the material going forward, added a lot of barbarians, this is particularly Mongol-themed cultures.
Which is fantastic. I did a paper on Genghis Khan. I'm a big fan of Mongol
Yeah.
ethnicity and history.
So the city of Mithranor was an elven city. It stood for about 400 years in the lore, but it was abandoned and taken over by creepy things.
as one does.
Yeah,
As
so
you do.
they expanded that with the campaign guide and adventures book. Menzo Baranzan, let's go be slaves to the drow.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so 3
You don't
books
get a
for that. Spellbound, the Red Wizards of Thay.
Love those guys. We killed them both.
Some here we got the ruins of
Zentil.
Zentil Keep.
That is a burning skeleton.
Yeah.
He's spoopy.
And then we've got Karator volumes 1 and 2.
That
So
looks very Japanese inspired.
it is. If Mr. Producer, could you pull up the full screen map of Toril for me?
Yeah, give me a second. I did have this.
Where's Scape? There he is.
This is
Somewhere.
We've overloaded Mr. Producer's brain today.
yeah. He can no longer miss the before
So
meetings.
many buttons.
There should be a full screen for Toril.
Yeah, I know.
It says that.
That's not it.
That's just the Faerun and the Sword Coast.
Yeah, look at a couple sections over there.
There's Toril.
Oh, hey, look, it's the lag.
Hey, look, it's not the full screen version.
It is.
No, there's a full screen.
It says Toro World Map. Oh,
Yeah, go.
Located.
Technical
So-
difficulties.
Oh, I'm gonna throw heavy objects at him. Anyway,
Well, we
No,
have these.
I
Stories.
was-
Don't have the object at
Back the
him.
books at your disposal.
We are not throwing the books.
No,
yeah,
we're not throwing
so-
these books.
anyway, the world of Toril. You'll see about in the middle is Faerun. To the left over here, we're gonna have what was that? Maztica, which was a series of books released independently that were later folded into the Forgotten Realms. Karator and all that stuff will be to the left, but Faerun is a small part of the Forgotten Realms, and there's a lot of things that we see now that are in 5th edition, like Aarakocra. And where were the cat people? They're
The Tabaxi.
Yeah, the Tabaxi. They come over from Maztica originally.
Maztica, yeah.
But you can have them in Faerun because they're on the same planet and they all have boats. So,
Well, I'm pretty sure the Aarakocra.
I don't know about that. It's quite a long ways, but
They can lock their wings
that's not how that works.
like an albatross.
No.
Mm.
But if Mr. Producer, go back to the map of Faerun, and you'll see what the difference is in what's available in the Forgotten Realms, and what we tend to see is Faerun.
Yes, the Forgotten Realms is much bigger.
Oh, yeah.
But this is where you spend most of your time, Katie.
Correct. I spend most of my time on the Sword Coast, typically utilizing Baldur's Gate, Water's Deep, or Candlekeep, honestly.
Candlekeep. All right.
Candlekeep's pretty cool.
I love the Candlekeep libraries. So much to do, so little time, and they really don't like it when you're not where you're supposed to be.
But it's so easy to be where you're not supposed to be. A majority of it is where you're not supposed to be.
This is
It's
true.
easy to stumble into it.
This is true.
You just go there on your own anyway.
So, tell us what if you were introducing the Sword Coast to a brand new player, how would you introduce? What would be some of the things you'd want to make sure that they saw or heard about to give them the flavor of that setting almost immediately?
Or what background do you think you would want to give them so they can put their character in the world?
Yeah.
I would probably start them out in Baldur's Gate. As terrible as of a city as it is, it's also a great varied city. And there's a great deal of traffic that comes through because of the tradeway. It's also a port city, so a sailor background would be great. You could be from Waterdeep originally, if you so chose, but Baldur's Gate has the variety of kind of a melting pot because it's in between Waterdeep and
So are there any races walking around the streets in the marketplace doing business that the normal average person on the street wouldn't normally see?
Baldur's Gate's a pretty even mix of humans, elves, dwarves, though you will find dragonborn, you'll find tieflings, you'll find a variety of halflings. The city itself is divided into 3 areas. Most of your nobility is human, so they're in the upper districts, and then you've got the lower district, which is more of your melting pot, and then you have the harbor itself, and you can have anything from anyone from across the seas, such as the Tabaxi, or the Aarakocra. You might find them there, though anyone with any common sense would avoid the Grey Harbor.
I don't have much of that.
It's very much like
well-
historical Carthage on the Mediterranean. Anyone from anywhere.
Pretty much. It's a great melting pot. It's basically in the middle of everything.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to go.
It's still one of my biggest.
All right,
Okay,
but
this is
pack light and
Pack light.
be prepared to be stabbed because it's a dangerous place.
Okay. Can I get my deposit back on my vacation
Nope.
trip then? No. Okay.
Only if you get stabbed.
Only if you get stabbed.
Stay away from the halflings.
So, what
caravan
kind of things
outside.
do you take and borrow from the written material, the pre-made material, either first or fifth edition, that you've changed to your liking for your homebrew stuff?
So, because I do base most of my stuff in the Forgotten Realms and specifically the Sword Coast, I utilize a lot of the history, a lot of the lore. My current game utilizes a lot of effects from the Spell Plague and a lot of effects that happened before the Second Sundering.
Since we have a couple of major disasters here that have still affected the
Just
planet.
a few.
We kind of skipped over that. There's a lot of deep, dark history to Forgotten Realms.
We've had one or two apocalypses. It's fine.
It's just a couple.
Just a couple. It's fine. The board's only been wiped like twice.
Twice.
Maybe
Yeah.
3 times.
That's the average commander game, honestly.
Yeah.
So it's all good. That should give a little bit of idea of the Forgotten Realms. But as promised with Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realms, we also want to provide information that can help game masters out there that are looking to either add to a setting or create a setting of their own.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about the maps here. If Mr. Producer could bring back the Sword Coast, and we'll talk just a little bit about some of the layout and things that we can expect to see, because it's quite a varied region. I think it's part of why it's so popular.
Yes.
Obviously, we've got seafaring, several large port cities,
Mhm.
but you come inland where you've got forest, grasslands, a bit of a desert, glaciers to the north, mountains.
You've got the mountain ranges. You've
The
got
varied biomes are very
so
important
much.
to me in particular, because I have always been a fan of wildlife, and knowing the biomes and how they are able to very carefully weave into one another, it really helps kind of build that biological diversity in the wildlife.
It does.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you find all sorts of creatures in various
All
biomes.
And so, yeah, Sahagin, a fish monster, is
Mhm.
not going to necessarily be in the middle of the desert, unless it's food, perhaps. But
I'd be concerned if I found one in the middle of the desert.
yeah,
That would be
They'd be
interesting.
pretty crispy at that point.
get some sandfishers maybe. But
It'd be scary if it wasn't.
as
Just
you
a
were,
perfectly fine Sahara just walking through the desert.
no, that's bad, Quinn.
It's
So-
very bad.
What we do is when we're looking at the maps or when you're developing a map, some of this will help inform later decisions.
Right.
So as we start to place countries, we figure out cultures, or the Quinn's point, what sort of wildlife we would expect to find in certain regions. The map is going to be the starting point for that as we look at our world or creating the world. Dad and I were talking a little bit about this yesterday. You're not going to find dwarves mining in the middle of the plains. It's going to be very uncommon. They're typically going to be where the mountains are and those sorts of things. So knowing where in the map those are going to be found will help you locate large, civilizations or cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Troy, do you have any tips on making maps?
Well, I can't draw,
Neither can I.
so I use Google a lot. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Google,
Mhm.
maybe once or twice.
Is that like Bing?
It's like
I
Bing,
thought it was
but
Yahoo.
better.
I want to hate you.
Man, that
Google.
one.
So-
that one hurts my soul.
If you go to Google and just do a search on ancient maps, you'll find just a whole bunch of them. And the ones that I particularly like are the ones from the 1700s.
Mhm.
And they have the little sea monsters drawn on them. I like those. They're very colorful. They're very artful. They have that old look because they
Mhm.
are. So a lot of times I grab one of those, call it my own, print it out, and actually add to it with drawing. Sometimes watercolors, sometimes crayon, just to make the map and change it up enough so that when I hand it to my players, I can say, "This is a new area," and they look at it and go, "Yeah, sure, okay, yeah, we're going here. Yeah, you're going there."
Can't guarantee the reliability of the map maker, but yeah, you're going here.
Well, that's another point. In history, a cartographer was very sought after, and a cartographer was never home because he was out exploring, drawing maps.
Yep.
Mhm.
And when he got back, he'd have another map. He would give it to his guys, and his guys would turn into a Xerox machine and make copies of it and sell it to pay for the next expedition.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever the cartographer was had, like one guy in Ponce de Leon, he had his own cartographer as part of his crew.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Columbus had a cartographer as part of his crew.
Yep.
And when these guys went out in the ocean and they got lost, whose fault was it? The guy with the map. So, but some of those
in the ocean, I feel like it's the person reading the stars and the compass, but it's fine.
There are you can go to Google and you can find maps from the 14 to 1600s with Antarctica on the map, which is very interesting because white man never got to Antarctica before 1880s. So somebody drove a boat around Antarctica and did their calculations and drew the coastline of Antarctica prior to 1880. So you can find some very interesting maps that you can take full advantage of because they're open domain. You can just print them out, change them, and come up with some really cool designs. Call it your own. Nobody's going to know. But also, all of these books, this older material, every one of them came with a volume of maps. Every one of the box sets, the reason why I love all the boxes all came with maps. And so you have that map, you can take it out, and you put a piece of paper over it and trace just a section of it and finish coloring that in and give it to your players. And they look at that and say, well, that's the map the last guy had, or that's the map you just found. So you, as another explorer, should add on to it to further complete the map as part of your travels and your journey. And sometimes the players get into that and really can add a lot of spice to the game, especially when somebody else who can't draw is trying to make the map. You get into or when you're mapping out a dungeon and say, oh, it's 50 feet, and then the hallway turns left. Okay, do you mean at 50 feet, that's the first corner, or is that 50 feet at the far corner? Where are we measuring this? Oh, okay, so I want to know who has the tape measure, because you're just walking down and taking a guess as to how far down the hallway
It's the dwarf with the calibrated eyeball.
So maps can add a lot of things to your game.
Yeah.
Especially you always want to have the guy that can't draw, though, doing them, because it really adds a lot. And the rest of your players will pull their hair out because he'll get them lost every time. But it adds a lot of, I think it adds a lot of fun to it. It adds but maps definitely start the whole process of your culture, your war histories, your borders of your countries.
Yeah.
So I want a mountain here. I want to put a river there. This is going to be a great forest. And as soon as you decide where you even want to put major landmarks like that together, well, who's going to live in the mountains? Well, not the elves. Who's going to live in the major forest? Well, not the dwarves. So you can kind of start seeing where the races are just going to naturally migrate. And they're going to settle there. So it's not that you put up a fence and said, no dwarves over here. I mean, you may find some, but for the most part, that's where that race is going to be.
Yeah.
And you also, when you're figuring out where your dwarves and your elves and humans are living, the major settlements, where are your monsters? Because the monsters, all of them, like he was calling it, what was that fancy word?
Biomes.
Yeah. So certain monsters will naturally tend to one type of habitat.
Yeah.
Swamps, trees, mountains. And so that's where you're going to find all those. And so some of those things just naturally will click together. As soon as you start building your map and say, I want mountains here and a river here and this over here, well, that starts all your thing. And then your borders between your countries. Borders between your countries, because that's a military border.
Well, we get to laying countries down after we figure out the maps. So there's other considerations. Slow down, Troy.
You're going too fast.
But definitely, what we're worried about there is the actual land masses. And it's a fantasy world setting. If you're building your own thing, they can be arbitrary. You can literally have a giant frozen zone in the middle of your continent if you want to.
Yeah.
Your favorite has giant desert.
If you have an unusual landmass someplace where it typically isn't, that is just the starting point for a story and an adventure.
Yep, for sure.
Because Greyhawk also has one. Right in the middle of this huge forest is the Bright Desert. And it used to be called the Bright Mountain until two wizards had a fight and destroyed the mountain and turned the area into a desert. So the mountain is gone. It's just now a desert. So that created a story, but there's also several modules that came out of Greyhawk that take place there because the city had to move underground just to protect itself. And so the cultures changed when they went underground. So if you have a large ice formation for whatever reason, an area it's not, well, all these little creatures that are attracted to ice are going to want to live there. So you just developed a whole new story and a whole new plot line for another adventure.
Yeah. Hey, when you had some input on maps or map making for your games or modifying, whatever it is.
Can you draw?
I can actually, and I wish I had thought to bring it. I have a book on creating fantasy maps.
I believe I have the same book as you do, actually. I have fantasy maps for countries and fantasy maps for cities.
Cool.
And they appear to be the same author.
Very cool. I use it from time to time, but with the Faerun map, I actually use my big map for pretty much everything. I'll do localized maps if I need to, but for the most part, my players end up having to visualize in their heads what's going on. With the big map that I have, I keep trying to point it out, but I don't think anybody can see it.
It's fine.
I think this camera might.
It's all right. So yeah, with the big map,
I utilize it, and I utilize the fact that so this area is a forest or a grassland, and then I decide, well, there's no named cities right here around it, but I know that, say, El Toriel, a city further inland, is a widespread farming city, kingdom, right? Yeah. They've got a pretty good spread across the northern bank of the Gianathar River. But they don't go further south than that because there's no bridges.
All right.
Nobody has built a bridge to cross that river yet that is, other than at Baldur's Gate, the Bridge of Worms. And that's a scary bridge. I don't know if you've ever seen any, like, depictions of it.
No.
But it is built...
out of worms.
No, but it's built on top of pillars, on top of gnome homes, on top of cobblestone, on top of shops, on top of...
So,
and it just keeps layering itself.
That's one of the features of Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
But particularly with the maps, when you know that you've got a grasslands, you can then say, hey, this area is good for farming. Or it's going to have these sorts of areas. Or, even if there's not a dot on the map, you can add one.
Right. So you can add villages, you can add little hamlets, you can add trading posts. Because, hey, this is like almost a 2-week journey from one point to another. There's got to be something there in the middle.
Yeah.
There's not just endless expanses. People have moved, people have migrated, they've settled, they've been run over by monsters, they've come back, they've settled, they've gotten run over by monsters or floods. The cycle repeats itself. So you can put the little villages and the little trading posts where you need them to be. And that's what I do primarily. If I'm moving a party through what is a wilderness on the map, but they really need a city, or they need, at least a village where they can get some supplies, I'll make them a village. It may be something that's not on the map. Most of the time it isn't.
Yeah.
But here, have a little hamlet where you guys can rest.
I use a magical bar that appears when you want it. So if you're out in the middle of the nowhere and it's like, man, we really need an inn, we need to sit down and like take a minute to get some rest, this magical bar appears, owned by 3 mages.
I usually, at least when I was doing Savage Worlds, no, Forgotten Realms, I made tieflings to be kind of gypsy inspired, and so you would find their carts and caravans while you were on the road, because they're on the road with you at all times, and so you can travel with them. They're likely going wherever you're going eventually.
And that's a really good point, because tieflings typically aren't very well welcomed in most major cities or villages in the Forgotten Realms.
Precisely.
Making tieflings gypsies fits into that whole description of a gypsy.
Yeah.
They're not welcome anywhere.
Well, one of the things
totally unfair to the gypsies.
When you look at Old West maps that are detailed, typically you're going to find most small settlements were about 20 to 25 miles apart, because that's what you could cover in a day.
Yep.
On a horse.
On a horse. Yeah, maybe not on foot, but in a day on a horse, 20 to 25 miles. and you'd find the next little collection of buildings and maybe a
Mhm.
place to sleep and get some water.
This is where we ended up stopping because the wagon broke and we don't have the supplies to replace it. But hey, there's fresh water and there's a source of like basic food here
Yeah.
that I could make.
I don't want to walk anymore, and there's a river.
There's
So
a
there's a
town in Oklahoma. It's called Wagon Wheel, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small wagon train. It was less than 10 wagons, but a wagon wheel broke, and they weren't able to fix it, and they stayed there, and then they stayed there so long that they built houses, and then it's on the
Oh,
wagon
it
train.
grew up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it grew up, and it just over time it became a town.
So
Yep.
It was Wagon Wheel, Oklahoma.
as you're looking at the larger maps, obviously, if you assume that the official map of Faerun was a royal cartographer or college of something like that, right?
Mhm.
They're not necessarily going to have every little
Mhm.
village, encampment, or
Right.
redoubt that's out on the world setting. So you've got plenty of flexibility to add those things in for yourself. Whether it's one that you've fully fleshed out or it's something that you can randomly generate, get your guys some rest for the night, have them get eaten by goblins and something like that.
Run over by orcs. It's fun.
Yeah. I thought we are gonna get a rest, but no spell slots for you. So
Don't let them rest.
some of the things you can do with maps, particularly when you start placing your major dots, you always have room to fill in the small in-betweens when you're going through your adventures and that sort of stuff. Whether it's a map that you've created or a map that you're borrowing. But that does get us then into the cultures. As we're looking at maps, once you've got your terrain put in place, we can start to sort of figure out where we want city-states or countries or whatever, sort of geopolitical entities that you're going to want.
Right.
And keeping in mind, a lot of these will divide along major landmarks, rivers, mountains, and that sort of stuff. But Faerun in particular has a lot of the city-states.
Correct.
So that can be a lot of interest where each city-state will vary quite widely. You don't have a large region that's got a sort of national identity. You've got Baldur's Gate, and this is how we do Baldur's Gate.
Yep.
And it's different from Water's Deep. Why is I keep putting this in there?
I did it too.
So
We're going to Waters Deep.
I had some notes here. This is one of the things that's neat because of all the information, and this is just cultures that you'll find in Faerun. So we have 7 different major human cultures with their own styles of dress. Some of them have variations in skin coloring, patriarchal or matriarchal, and all those sorts of things. But 7 different human cultures, 3 different dwarf cultures, 5. We've got 5 elf cultures, which is more than we usually see. 3 different halflings, then 2 gnomes, and 6 outsiders. That's the Aasimar, the Genasi, and the Tiefling. So 4 of the major elementals, the Aasimar are the Celestials, and the Tiefling are the Demon, which is 26 variations in race and culture that you can find across just Faerun.
And you can find them in almost any combination
Yeah.
thereof.
So the elves that you had, there were 5?
Yeah.
Does that count the drow?
Yes.
Okay.
What about the moon elves?
Yes. Of course it counts the moon elves. It counts all the elves.
What about the rock elves?
I got rock gnomes. Anyway,
Elves.
there are no rock elves.
Dang it.
They haven't discovered anything outside the elite. The electric loot comes later. When our Lord and Savior Ozzy Osbourne brings the electric guitar.
Praise be the gods of rock. All hail King
I'm
Hendrix.
reminded of my dwarf character, Kaj Blackrock.
Yeah.
Kaj, Jack spelled backwards.
Yeah, it's all good.
Jack Black.
No.
Yes.
It's not.
The dwarf.
So good.
See why I'm sitting over here now?
Yeah, can I join you?
It's
But
funny.
so just when it comes to, as you're creating a culture, again, placing them around the map is going to have a huge influence on some of the things that become important to them. Particularly when you consider their genesis or how they travel from one region to another to finally settle there. Obviously fishing becomes important for along rivers or sea. Trade becomes a big thing at that point. We see a lot of the coastal cities. Waterdeep in particular has a huge trade hub.
Yes.
But the other coastal cities can't survive without it either.
Correct.
Further inland, we see more farming and agrarian cultures. And you'll start to see that too as we look around where the capital is, and not the capital cities, but where the money is, where those sorts of things that are important are at. Who's got armies, who doesn't, who's conquered what, and those sorts of things.
So tell me, Katie, when you had to build these little villages for your weary travelers to stay the night and recuperate those spell slots, when you built that little village, did you go further into what would be a culture or the type of people, or is it just a rest stop in the middle of the night?
I typically put some thought into it, at least. The biggest thing I consider is, where on the map are we? Are we a part of the coast currently? Do these people rely on fish? If so, that's going to very greatly influence what the people are eating. It'll be fish stew or baked fish. If we're in the heartlands, where the most of your grains are, most of your foods are going to be grain-based. They might have a lot of porridges, they might have a lot of breads. If you're up north, food may be scarce. It may be more pricey. The people may be less likely to offer more accommodations.
Perhaps more hunt and gather style berries and venison and such.
If you're in the forest, you might have more of the nature's bounty of, forest mushrooms, berries. Hey, we found these wild roots and all this lovely stuff if you're staying with the elves.
Small game and versus that. So, for sure. And interesting. And it helps as you're telling these stories, you're going through the world setting to keep the world setting alive and lived in.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that can really make a difference in the gameplay, is setting up the culture. If you're particularly if you hop on a boat and you go down the Sword Coast, every time you arrive in a new city, it should be fresh. It should feel fresh, and while you're in that area, it should feel the same. It needs to have some consistency. While you're in France, it's very different from Germany.
Even though they're United State distance apart.
Yeah, they're really not that far geographically, but France and Germany are quite different.
But culture itself makes a difference. What the people use on a daily basis, what they worship, what they dress in, how they talk. What someone says in, say, Waterdeep as slang may have a completely different meaning for someone in Baldur's Gate.
Trash can versus bin. They're like, okay, well, we both mean the same thing, but if I say bin here and I go there and I say bin and it's something derogatory, you're like, oh, well, now I'm in trouble because I just wanted to throw away some paper.
Oh, well, we were talking this afternoon. Saw a little short on Facebook where British young people in their 20s, for the first time ever, were going to eat biscuits and gravy. Well, a biscuit in Britain is a cookie.
Yeah,
so we call it cookie.
Yeah,
they call it a biscuit. So when you hear them talk about have biscuits and tea, cookies and tea. And the gravy was not what they term gravy. Gravy to them is more what we would call a sauce.
Yeah.
And so just the presentation of biscuits and gravy on a plate, and they were like, "Oh my God, what is this?" I was like, "It's great.
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
It's food. Please eat it."
Yes.
Well, that can mean quite a lot too. Historically, they had I forget what they called it, but it was a stew that they always added to. That was in an inn.
Oh, yeah.
Continual stew or something like that. And so they would always keep it hot so it wouldn't spoil or go bad, but they'd always add to it.
Right.
And so, not rock soup, no rocks.
No rocks.
But that could change.
The only thing I'm coming up with is coddle.
Coddle.
It might be along those lines.
A Dublin coddle, it's basically the continuous stew of...
But when you go in and you ask for the stew, it's whatever seasonal, and they may have some stuff from last year or whatever. Yeah. But that would change region by region.
Absolutely.
And so that's something...
Region by region and by season.
Yeah.
If it's winter outside, well, you're not going to be having, an apple pie if it's the middle of winter. Everything is very seasonal and varied by district. So you go one place, and like you're saying, you're going to have fish because that's what they have.
Yep.
You go somewhere else, they might have deer and potatoes because that's what they have as a common food item.
Yeah.
But it's also one of the things that I have a lot of fun with in Planescape, because there's actually a restaurant that's called Prime Exotics where you can go and get squirrel.
Yes.
Okay, then.
Living in another world setting, they have a whole company of hunters that just go to prime material worlds and hunt and bring back deer and squirrel and all kinds of vegetables, and there's wagon loads of stuff. But they bring all that because it's really, really cheap to buy here, and they take it to another world setting through plane travel.
Yeah.
And they have this really expensive restaurant, you know,
Exotic dishes.
Exotic dishes.
And that is how trade works.
That's pretty much it.
But the strange thing is when you have people from another world setting, or they're different worlds, but you have a food item that they haven't seen before. You know, it just explaining and describing it to them. You're like, it smells good, but you don't know what it is or what it was. You know.
Well, the other thing too is as we deal with cultures interacting, obviously conflicts arise.
Yeah.
And so we can, you know, that may be in the history, it may inform a future conflict or the one that you're telling your story around at this point. But so German mercenaries used to be a big deal in Europe up and through the Revolutionary War. Like when Washington crossed the Delaware, he fought the German mercenaries, the Hessians. So, you know, they would bring with them supplies, colors of their nation and things. So, you know, if you get jumped by a group of bandits and you start to find they have different food items or different writing or different, you know, memorabilia on them.
It could stamp on their coin is from another land.
Right.
It can imply that the king or a prince in another land is paying for these bandits to do this dastardly deed.
So rather than just, you know, populating your world and trying to fill it out or check all the boxes, culture can then, you know, be used to show where you've got intrigue as you're telling your story in this living world setting.
So when you think about countries going to war, or even any neighboring barons, they have, you know, if they got 20 or 30 guys and are fighting with their neighbor, historically, there's only been 3 reasons that anybody has ever gone to war. That's territory, just taking over the land, natural resources. That's why Japan was attacking China prior to World War II, because they wanted oil and metal. That was in China. And religion. We've gone to war multiple times all over the world because of religion.
That's why the Fall of the Dragons occurred. Rage of Dragons was the Draco Holy Wars in Faerun.
I love the sound of that.
It literally was the different draconic factions disagreeing over religion. And they tore themselves apart.
Like, well, we think Tiamat's 5 heads are way cooler than Bahamut's wood. It's like, you take that back!
Pretty much. Pretty much.
I have heard a different 3 reasons for war that are slightly more philosophical, and they are kind of what I use when I plan out my games, and they are fear, pride, and self-interest. And certainly it covers everything you just covered. It doesn't disagree.
That would definitely lead to personal motivations.
Well, right. Practical versus philosophical. Yeah. And so, for sure. And they can mix together to form the impetus for war or aggression.
Exactly.
For sure.
They all work together.
So before...
You use everything you can find.
Quinn, did you have anything else that you want to add for culture as well? You've been kind of... I know you've played Forgotten Realms a little bit, but you've also done a lot of game design.
I have done quite a bit of game design, and I steal cultures from real life. So as I'm
is this your gypsy culture?
Yeah, that's what I do. Here's this group of people who are they're discriminated against. They kind of have to travel a lot because people don't want them in one area for too long. They're seen as a bad vibes. They're, you know, accused of
ill omen.
Yeah, ill omen kind of stuff. And really, when you dig deep into them, they don't deserve any of that. Tieflings and gypsies.
Yeah.
Well, I completely get that. I mean, that I'm going to steal that myself. Tieflings as gypsies. I can definitely see that working very well.
I mean, honestly, the moment I made that connection was literally just the first tiefling you see in the player's handbook. In
the way they're dressed.
The way they're dressed. That's very gypsy.
Very gypsy, very flamboyant.
It makes a lot of sense because we encountered them first in Planescape. And they have a different sort of flavor, the way that they're connected to planar travel and the things that are going on within the Planescape.
Right.
So we always thought it was very odd to see them sort of just brought into Forgotten Realms in 3rd edition. And they're like, why the heck did he put these guys here? They're demons. No one wants a demon just hanging out.
Demon spawn.
I do.
Which is still bad.
Which
So
Mostly.
that's
but,
kind of
but the gypsy thing.
Yeah.
You know, if they're gonna be there, that would probably be how they would have to
That would
survive.
be a
So,
very good
Yeah,
justification.
communes and gypsies.
that's kind of why I say I steal things, because I have a background and an interest in history, and I'm constantly trying to learn about all of these real world cultures. And the more that I draw in, the more reference points I have to tweak them.
Right, sure.
yeah.
So that's what I mean by I steal stuff, is that I steal, rework,
Right.
and I just draw inspiration from real life. And it gives you a helpful tool, because when you introduce this group, avoid just saying, you know, like gypsies, like we've been doing.
They're
But when you
nomadic.
introduce this group, and they have these colorfully painted carts, and they play tambourines and flutes, and they dance with flamboyant clothes, your
Exotic
players
instruments.
are going to make that inherent connection. They've seen Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Well, it's the same thing if you're dealing
They're
with.
gonna make that connection. They're
Yeah.
gonna have
Well,
so
here,
many
Look
assumptions
at the lady on the front of the city system.
that
For
work.
sure.
I mean, this
But-
is true, yeah.
But
no,
the-
no. The
that-
lady on the front of the city system, you must look closer,
is a vampire.
It's a
is a
vampire.
vampire. Two guys laying dead on the floor behind her actually have marks on their neck.
Yeah, Barovia.
But she still looks more
Barovia.
gypsy.
Barovia.
Right.
Nomadic.
Right.
Oh
colorful
man, that
dress.
is subtle. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um,
Vampire.
so
Okay,
what was I
then.
doing? Right. That's to Quinn's point. When you're do get to the parts where you're talking about cultures, you might avoid like you have a Chandathan da 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 da, but you know instead you have knights in fluted plate with blue and gold banners, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's
Charlemagne's
those good.
mates.
Well, then versus you have large flat pauldrons, or like when you describe a Roman centurion,
Yeah, exactly.
right? The segmenta and the large
Play
yeah.
on of the base core assumptions that your players should already have, because with just a few words you have already summoned from their mind everything they know about this similar culture.
Right, and
Yeah.
and that way you can describe a heavy armored knight, but the way you describe them shows, oh, these guys are from that area and these guys are from that area.
Precisely.
Especially if you just say heavy armored knight, most people are gonna think like, 1200s English plate mail.
Right, the typical stuff. But any final words from you, Katie?
Nothing super on culture aside from a lot of culture in Faerun itself is shaped around the religions that different races have brought together or have different groups have managed to gain power in the bigger city states.
Yeah, that's not actually something. Well, we do have lore. We'll talk a little bit more, but it's a multi-theistic pantheon.
Yeah.
That's quite broad for Faerun, and the gods of Faerun are quite active in the setting, and that does influence the daily lives of the people and the cultures that build around them. So
When you say active in the culture,
There was a time when they walked the land as mortals.
oh, that is
I mean-
active in the culture.
Forgotten Realms has got gods active like the Greek gods were.
Yeah.
Nice.
Constantly meddling with their fingers in the
Meddling.
pot.
For sure, and which is a little different than what we see in Dragonlance or Greyhawk, where there's only a few that you might be able to potentially encounter. In Greyhawk and Dragonlance is kind of like, it kind of does its own thing, but Forgotten Realms very Greek in its activity and influence of the gods in the setting, in the stories.
Nice.
So
I have been slowly moving away from that kind of storytelling, but that's my personal thing.
it just depends on the setting.
Nothing will teach a 12th level fighter that he's still very mortal than actually run into the avatar or the god itself of whoever he's been fighting lately.
The
Yeah.
fighters don't need to be humbled. They need some help. It's the wizards that need humbled. The fighters need a freaking chance.
Quinn has not been very
I'm
happy
Quinn
with.
the fighter. Dang it.
He needs a +11 longsword. It's
Quinn the floor DPS.
Exactly.
Okay,
Thank
but
you.
it is
I'm
it is
Quinn the
almost
I have no
kinda
options.
true. Our my main game, our fighter tank misses more than he hits,
Thank you.
and he doesn't hit very well.
Hey, I'm a wizard. I'm gonna target 11 guys and make them roll the dice.
Yeah.
Have fun, DM.
well then, all right. So let's talk a little bit about, as we've now got a map, we've got some cultures on the map, or maybe some geopolitical areas. We need to have a history to our world setting, and luckily, Forgotten Realms is insane. With 35,000 years on the one calendar, there are, I think, 7, but we only talk about 5 and really worry about 1.
Yeah.
So 35,000 years in the Dale Reckoning. The Dale Reckoning was a big event between humans and elves, but we have a huge amount of history that informs the world setting before we even get into it. Current 5th edition's around 1450 Dale Reckoning.
Roughly between 1450 and 1492.
Depending on the module or the content. First edition starts in, I got it right here, 1387, I thought it was.
1387, 1385, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I've got too many pages of notes. I'm sorry, guys.
I forgot all of my notes at home, so.
You said you had them in your head.
I mean, I do have most of them in my head, but numbers get twisted.
Oh,
yeah.
1360.
There we go. So it was around 1387. So even by the time we get to the first edition release, we're 1,300 years past the Dale Reckoning event. Right. Elves are ancient, but there's stuff that's even older than them. And it's one of the things I think that adds a lot of strength to the Forgotten Realms setting is its long history.
Yeah.
So there's some events that we'll talk about a little bit, Katie, because these other guys don't know a whole lot about some of the things that have come up since first edition, particularly. But Toril is not just Toril, is it?
No, it's actually 2 worlds. You've got Avir and Toril. And they are separated by a planar barrier, which at certain points in history has either been weakened severely or damaged to the point that parts of the continents actually switch.
So it's Toril is interesting. We've got it's not a shadow world, I forget how to describe it, but it's almost like a mirror.
It's a mirror, essentially.
Exists in the same space, but it separated again by a barrier.
Yeah.
It's the upside down.
They originally were one until the event known as the Sundering. And so that was the first Sundering about 30-some thousand years ago.
Right. And you had Asgaroth, the Primordial, in a rage threw an ice moon at Toril and broke the planet.
Yeah, so that's where we get Saloon, the Tears of Saloon. We get into some of the things. Mithranor was established and reigned for 400 years. Those are major events in the old calendar. The first spotting of humans, the elves recorded that. Like, what are those guys?
Something new's moving.
Wars between different elf factions, the splitting of the elves, establishment, rise, fall, and moves. All these sorts of things end up in the history that get us to where we see Forgotten Realms by the time we get the first edition campaign setting.
Right.
A lot of this was put together by Ed Greenwood to establish the lore of his games and his short stories. And then was further developed after TSR got a hold of it, and of course Wizards of the Coast has continued its development.
Yep.
So when it comes to history, Quinn, do you have a lot that underpins some of your games when you write a history? Do you have a starting point? Do you start with the creation of the world, or
no? I actually start at I don't know.
You don't know. So
it depends.
This is where
when I'm developing my own world, I want to know what it's like now, and I work backwards for how did it get that way. What's an interesting inciting action?
Sure. So if you were starting at World War II, World War I was a huge influence into the events that led to that Second World War. So if you started there, you could work backwards and be like, oh, okay, this thing.
So like, if I wanted to start I'm not going to use anything post-apocalyptic because that's currently what's on my mind.
Stop nuking
a pirates game.
Okay.
All right. So I want to make a game about pirates, but I want it to have fantasy elements like it does for Forgotten Realm. So I would work backwards. At what point did they develop gunpowder? At what point did they start making ships
Right, outside
from
of
boats.
fishing boats, yeah.
Like, what was the first big ship that changed everything?
Mhm.
Like, that's a critical piece of information of when did we go from kayaks to multi-gunned men of war.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know?
That's also a shift in technology.
Yes.
Right.
Some of the
And
terms I use to describe a world when I'm working on it is technology versus magic.
Mhm.
Because if you have a high technology, you're going to have less magic.
Mhm.
Like Star Wars, you don't have anybody casting fireballs, but you do have people running around with blasters.
And you do have a guy casting lightning bolt.
Yes. So,
but one guy.
Just one.
when you make the shift in the cultures,
Mm.
you can think about like Egypt. They made boats out of reeds and just bundle them together, and you make a canoe, and make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger,
Mhm.
and then you can float stone down the Nile.
Mhm.
But those are all shifts in technology, because every time you build something bigger, it didn't work the first time,
Mm.
and you had to make changes to the
Mhm.
design. And those are all shifts in technology.
And that comes with new resources being found. That comes with clever people
Mhm.
stepping up to the plate who are able to make those changes. And now you have people, you have resources that can be fought over, that have war start over them. I work
Absolutely.
backwards.
Yep.
And when I work backwards and I find an interesting point, I can then branch off. It's not branching timelines, but it's like, not only did this event that I wanted to have happen, but I've found a new event that could occur simultaneously.
These events
Yeah.
spider down into
Exactly.
Right.
I'll
or
give some
spider out from.
a couple
So I
examples.
work my way back and forth. That's why I was like, where do I start? I just
I'll just
go.
So the 35,000 years ago is not the creation of the world of Forgotten Realms by any means. But I'll give you just a few examples here. Minus 1064 Dale Reckoning. The Netherese, in an era of traveling the plains, first encounter the Illithids.
The Lithians.
Illithids, whatever. You can get Illithids, but you can't
No,
get...
thank you.
just-
No,
yeah.
thank you.
Arena Zoidberg.
Oh, God, Zoidberg. Minus 530 Dale Reckoning in Kalamazhan, which is a region.
Mhm.
The Drow retreat underground. This marks the final time the Drow truly held any land on the surface.
Yeah.
And so that's minus 530. That's been 2,000 years since
That
the Drow.
that is a major event. And
Yeah.
I use that major event as part of my There Is No War Like a Holy War campaign that I made years ago.
Mhm.
That's a major event that I tied into Planescape.
Driving the drow underground.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge, you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people shifting their whole way of life, their culture, where they live, everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a major, major change.
And that's kind of a perfect example. Like, if I wanted to start with, there are dark-skinned elves underground and they're bitter and evil and worship demons. How
Yes.
did they get that way? I worked backwards. I would have worked backwards to get there.
So this is going to be kind of fun here because it deals with one of the modules we can actually play. But it's the event that starts this is really old. So minus 30,000 to minus 24,000. 6,000 years here. The Dawn Ages, when the creator races, including the Sarakur, disappear or fade, replaced by the time of dragons and the time of giants.
Yep.
The adventure Storm King's Thunder, which we can get now for 5th edition, deals with these events. In minus 30,000, the Nether Scrolls are created, and the Celadrine Wars take place where Lolth becomes a demon. Lolth being the Spider Queen for the Drow,
Yes.
30,000 years ago. That's a huge event. So some of these things where if you have something that becomes anchored, or you have something elevated to a demon or god status that will continue to persist in your world, those histories can be important. Yes.
Very important.
Forgotten
Yes,
Realms.
Drow,
Drow,
the
yeah.
Underdark.
And so whether it's the advent of a technology or a war or an attack, or you'll just need to figure out what events are important to underpin your stories, underpin your world setting, and again, what got you to where you are today. So this was 30,000 years ago, and Storm King's Thunder is like 1430 by the time we
Right.
get into that. So it's been quite a long time that these things have existed in the world and have had influence or have been waiting to be discovered. So how would
When are you playing? We won't play.
but that's just some of the
Have
stuff.
fun.
What are some of your favorite events from Forgotten Realms history?
Is there any of them?
Well,
any of them
wait.
that stand out that you use or hint of?
And we'll get into the time of Blue Fire and stuff in a
Dark
second.
Hole.
But
Well, I mean,
anything
it
beyond
doesn't
those?
have to actually be going on. I mean, it could be like
Right.
travelers going to a tavern and there's an old man telling stories.
Right. So, like, as you said, the Dawn Age, the dragons and giants had majority control of the land.
Mhm.
They used most of the humanoid races as slaves at that time. And the dragons actually drove the giants north.
Right.
They forced them out of what we consider to be the heartlands,
Mhm.
and forced them into the spine of the world,
Mhm.
which is why you find so many giants that far north and up into the Icelands. That personally, that's just a fascinating conflict to me because it's just such a big scale. Because at that time, most of the stuff that we have information wise says that the creatures, the dragons and the giants, were both much larger and much more powerful.
Mhm.
And so I can only imagine what kind of conflict that was as far as the raw power between them.
It's kaiju.
Yeah, it's just,
That's what
and then you've got us, the humans, running around trying to serve the dragons, you know, and just trying not to get squished. And then
You're like, hey Godzilla, I got an apple. I got an apple for you guys. Oh no.
pretty much, and then you've got the whole bit where I mentioned the Draco Holy Wars.
Mhm.
After the dragons had settled their territory and had different clans and individuals had taken over areas, they began infighting. They began arguing over the religion. They began arguing over, hey, you need to give me your territory because you're just one dragon and my clan needs your territory.
Yeah.
And so they started destroying one another. And from that destruction, then we started seeing the rise of the elves. We
Right.
started seeing the rise of the dwarven kingdoms. And then later on, we see the rise of humans because humans just kind of go everywhere.
Right.
Humans are wayfarers and wanderers and are ridiculously adaptable.
Mhm.
We are the rodents of the intelligent species. We spread, we eat, we breed.
If only we had the same resistances as cockroaches.
That
Just
would
go
be
nuke
mildly
yourself, little
terrifying.
brother. Yeah. So we'll get the first sundering is in minus 6,000.
Mm-hmm.
So in the timeline, we've got about 15,000 years, 20,000 years where Abel Toril is together.
Right.
And then the elves actually caused the first sundering. So that event is, where is it here?
The High Magister.
Yeah, they create / summon the island of Evermeet to be their own homeland, and the cost is unexpectedly high. The magic stresses across time and space, altering the landscape with natural disasters on Toril and the middle world, Eber killing thousands. Only thousands. There weren't that many
Only
there.
thousands. But it also
That's fine.
wiped out a good chunk of elven cities that had spread at that point.
Right, which is why we don't see them, which made the space that we see the dwarves
And the
or humans move into
yeah.
later. But so the first sundering was a huge deal, and it sets us up for Toril as we know it in present time. By the time we get around 4th edition, we get we actually have a god die.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So 4th edition kicks off with Cyric, aided by Shar,
Mhm.
murdering the goddess of magic Mystra. And when Mystra dies, it rips the weave, the literal magic of the universe apart. And you see the events unfold that are practically cataclysmic in every grand way of the blue fire
Mhm.
that raced across the lands and burned both worlds, not just
Mhm.
one. And the lack of magic that happened, the wild magic that surged, the spell plague that emerged from the blue fire. There's just so many things that happened in that era.
Well, in the don't forget that we started also having merging. So we started to see Abel,
Abra and Toril started
getting
switching
dragged. Give me
places.
some water. Yeah, well, they're switching places or merging in weird and unexpected ways. So we see mutations of creatures, additions of creatures, dead magic zones, all sorts of stuff like that.
It went haywire, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word.
So that was a pretty big thing that happened.
Major.
And you still play with that in your game, you'd mentioned.
I do.
So for the most part, Wizards in the timeline sort of moved past that. But it's still a big deal, and I think that's proper to continue to have fallout from such a massive cataclysm.
There are still pockets in the homebrew version that I'm using. There are still pockets of places where the spell plague is still going. there are still mutations happening. There are still areas of dead zone magic where you can't cast spells, or you cast a spell and then something even worse happens and it causes a chain event. I have a couple of areas set up where there's a swamp that is a dead magic zone. And it's literally a dead zone. Anything that enters it has the potential to become corrupted.
There you go.
And mutate.
Well, that's not good.
Yeah, it's not going to be much fun if any adventurers end up there. They may not come back the same.
Yeah, then we can form X-Men.
There we go. So the spell plague was huge. The death of a god. The event ultimately ends when Mistra is reborn.
Right.
Well, the guy has to sacrifice himself because he understands what.
Which is fine. Yeah, there's a lot that happens to cover it, but it's a very cool set of stories. So if you want to go check that out, the 4th edition books cover it. You can convert what you need to into the 5th edition rule set, but 4th edition, they had the Faerun guide and a couple of campaign books.
Yeah, and I primarily pull the history from the previous editions into my 5th edition game.
Right, and what's interesting, if you want, I've got like a pretty comprehensive list, but it doesn't cover every detail of the spell plague and the merging event. And then, of course, the details around Mistra's death and stuff also made it into some of the books that were written in the Forgotten Realms. So if you didn't want to grab that content to play it, it's in novel form, and they're very good. So
what type of details did you pull forward from those catastrophes that you use in your 5th edition game?
Details such as...
We said some of those historical effects that happened, you incorporate into your story.
A lot of the story that I work with is based around previous events and the repercussions of. There's been, like, say, with the death of Mistra and the spell plague and the mutations and the problems and the creatures that have emerged since, you get some of the creatures that they're shambling, they're boil covered, and they cause infestations, or they are overrunning settlements. Most of that's been driven back by the time my campaign starts. But there are still remnant effects of it. There are still areas where it's still festering. It's still underground waiting to come out. There's still a pocket of, mutated giant rats that are ready to spread the plague again, essentially.
ROUSs.
Yeah. We love ROUSs, don't we?
Yeah. That's interesting. So they go to just any village and you're going to have something there to remind them that, hey, this happened.
Potentially. More commonly, you'll find the worst of the spell plague effects near Neverwinter, where the city was torn in half and the underside of the city was basically riddled with spell plague. When the mountain, I can never say Mount.
I don't know either.
Hotanau?
I always say Hatnau.
Hatnau. I don't know how to say that one. That is the one word that I always go, there's too many letters.
Mount H.
Yeah, there we go. Mount H. When it exploded, it caused a chain reaction of spell plague creatures being released because they were in the Underdark, and they spilled out into the cities and began wreaking havoc.
So the deal in the back of my head is hearing all these different creatures like this. There's got to be a long list of unique monsters to Forgotten Realms that I'm not going to run into anywhere else.
Right.
Well, beyond that, the spell plague had its own set of unique variations of those monsters.
They could be infected.
So particularly if you're dealing with some of the material that was available in 4th edition, you'll find, okay, I've got a goblin or a dire rat. Now I have a spell plague dire rat. And how are they different? What things do I have to worry about with the spell plague rat versus my regular big rat? The those things are in print. They're easy for you to go find and get and pull that forward into your game if you wanted to continue those effects or deal with those fallout.
But that's one of the things that makes Forgotten Realms unique in and of itself as a world setting. You're not going to have that problem
necessarily elsewhere.
Yeah, on Dark Sun or Mysteria or even Greyhawk. It doesn't exist there.
Yeah. So
we have our own problems.
And then the last major event after the Spell Plague was the Second Sundering.
Yeah, Second Sundering, because one was not enough.
Well,
correct.
As
many apocalyptic events. It's a great land to live in.
So
Totally
with the restoration of Mystra, moving from 4th edition into 5th edition, we advanced the timeline a little bit. But the restabilization of the Weave reseparates the worlds and largely returns Toril to the way that we know it, or knew it before.
Right.
Not entirely. I mean, we lost a mountain.
Yeah.
So
we lost a mountain. There's still some bits. There's still some parts of the continent that switched and just didn't come back.
My mountain?
Yeah.
It's called.
So,
if you find my lost mountain, oh,
yeah.
There's also a mountain that left before all of that happened, so it's just out somewhere.
Yeah, there's a
$15
couple
reward.
15, yeah. But
Mountain ran away from home.
one of the things that we have to deal with is we're looking at that is, moving forward, there is still a lot of fallout. We got a lot of reshaping.
Mm-hmm.
But we see, we have greater access now into the Underdark.
Right.
There's a mountain that's not on top of it anymore. Things come out or people go back into it. So we start to see more drow activity to the surface, more Drugar activity to the surface than what we used to have, particularly around Neverwinter,
Yep.
which was never, the safest place to be, but it's not that much worse now. Much more dangerous. It didn't really hurt it. It was always bad. Yeah.
Well, but at one time it was called the Jewel of the North, and it was considered a beautiful city. But then a lot of things happened, and it just went downhill from there.
Yeah,
Fantasy.
Oh,
Fantasy
it's like
to
Chicago.
Yeah, some of those. But that's where we end up. Those are some of the major historical events that shape the world of Forgotten Realms, and then that gets us to where we are today, and even some of what we play today, 4th edition and 5th edition content around the Spell Plague and the Second Sundering, and past that. So this is where, as you're creating the history for your world settings, you can be as fantastical or as mundane, as long as you have something that informs you of where the world has been to get you to where you're playing now, where your story is going to be at now, and then you can start to write your adventures from there. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is governments, because we've talked a lot about disasters, and typically when disasters happen, we have governments.
Usually.
Right, ideally. But we've got Forgotten Realms doesn't have kingdoms like we would expect. We see that a lot in Greyhawk, right? Large kingdoms, very fantasy kingdom.
Right.
We have a lot more city-states, which is true historical,
More city-states, more nobles in councils, and more alliances.
So that can change the way that you have a response to a disaster, but it also, changes a lot of things within a region, outside of the disasters and things, just when you're setting up a region. Who's responsible for commerce? How do guilds work? What is industry? Tax structures, travel restrictions, those sorts of things are going to come around your government, more authoritative versus more liberty. There's a lot of different ways to structure the governments, and we do see a lot of those councils or lordships in Forgotten Realms.
So when you build these little cities that your brave adventurers overnight in, do you typically make a council, or is it just somebody in charge?
Mayors and
For the smaller communities, a village, they might have a head spokesperson. A trading post will most likely have whoever the oldest or most established merchant is as the spokesperson for the trading post. Actual towns or cities typically have more either, hey, this family's been here the longest, so they're the nobles of this particular spot by default. They're the ones that are in charge. Or in the case of like Baldur's Gate, where it's already established, I have the noble houses that are in control, or they're the patriarchs, technically, in control of Baldur's Gate. And then from there, so Baldur's Gate doesn't have a huge influence outside of it. It's Baldur's Gate, and then there's a bit of an outer city, and then nothing for the most part around. They don't really have control over much of the countryside. But if you look at Elturiel, the kingdom inland from them, Elturiel actually has several other towns and cities under its kingdom of Eltgard.
Quick question: do those
I'm gonna bring your chair over a little bit.
Yeah, all right.
You're falling off the back.
That's right. Well, it's just my leg is over here.
Yeah.
Do those smaller towns and villages outside of that country, do they like pledge fealty to Elturel, or are they more under Elturel's annexation?
It depends. Some of them are where they've pledged fealty, and some of them have just been taken over as Elturel has expanded. A lot of your really tiny hamlets haven't existed long enough to be on anyone's radar.
Yeah.
So a lot of your tiny villages, they might be like, yeah, I'm an Elturian. Or, the Baldur's Gate, maybe there's one or two hamlets around, but they're going to be like, yeah, we don't really have we just kind of live here. Nobody claims this land. It's no man's land.
Right.
But you'll find that the majority of your trade causes the majority of your power to consolidate in this land.
That's true.
Yeah. So we'll do dealing with some feudal systems, but a lot of trade and guild type stuff in the Forgotten Realms. When you establish something that's going to be a little bit higher in its authority, don't forget to include law as part of government. And so the way that thieves are dealt with in Baldur's Gate may be a little different than Waterdeep.
Right.
In Waterdeep, they'll throw you down the yawning portal. And say, kids up in the Underdark. Haha. And otherwise, they might cut your hands off, or you'll see some of those other punishments.
Waterdeep has a stricter guard force because they have the city watch, and then they have the actual guard of the city. It's a little bit different.
Right, so like a police force and a military force.
Correct. Whereas Baldur's Gate doesn't actually have that. They only have the Flaming Fist, which is a mercenary company that was hired by the patriarchs of the city to patrol the upper district.
So they protect themselves. So they've got bodyguards.
And then the lower district is actually policed by individual guilds or gangs.
Right, protecting their turf.
1920 Chicago.
Pretty much. And then the outer city, which is not officially recognized by the Baldur's Gate patriarchs as a true part of Baldur's Gate, because it's outside the walls, is almost a free-for-all. The Flaming Fist are pretty much never seen there because, quite honestly, they're outnumbered.
Right.
They are one neon sign away from being cyberpunk.
So, Quinn, when you develop worlds and you've done a lot of sci-fi with smaller settlements and things that would fit into this, how do you structure your towns and governments in those situations?
So it all grows from the ecology, which we've already talked about, the kind of things that they have power over, and that's what it really comes down to, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is that it comes down to power. What power do we have? What power can we hold? What power can we take? And what do we not even have a chance against? So when I'm developing that, I want to develop who has the power in this relationship. So in Baldur's Gate, for example, or was it Waterdeep, the one that had the layers?
Baldur's Gate.
Baldur's Gate
has the layers.
Has the layers.
So we have the money.
Yeah.
Right.
That's our power. We can hire the paramilitary forces. We want to keep our money safe. We want to get more money, and we want to keep everyone else from getting our money. And so that's how that relationship is structured. And then they will find a way to find ideals to conceal that and keep the under people fighting each other. I'm designing for Fallout right now. So the basic answer is nobody has power.
Right.
Because it's a post-apocalypse and it's everyone for themselves. There are a few shanty towns. There are a few hovels that have decided to work together.
Mhm.
And for the most part, that's working. But the bigger they grow, the less that will start to work. Because now you're going to have more resources. And when there are more resources, you're going to have 1, 2, 3 people who want those resources.
Mhm.
They don't want you to have them. They're my resources. So power structure and power play plays a big role in how I design my governments, and then using the religions of the area, using the ecology of the area, I give them a hook.
Sure. And so that would be very much a story centric. Your governments often end up being antagonists.
Yes,
So-
almost 100%. I've been doing crime campaigns for the last decade.
Right. So, but
It's always against the cops.
It makes sense if you have a faction within Baldur's Gate that you wanted to create that was seeking to usurp the power of the patriarchs and carve out a section of the city for themselves.
Right.
Maybe move from outside the wall to the lower city. You're gonna have several factions, and the things that they're working on might fall within that philosophical slant.
Mhm.
I was more getting into a feudal lordship has a different structure, king, queen, vassals,
Mhm.
knights, those sorts of things. Even where we've got our republic structure with tricameral or bicameral senates, division of powers, and those sorts of things.
Exactly.
You don't tend to see a lot of that because it's in the small towns you have mayors,
Yep.
and they're pretty much the final word.
Right.
You might have a magistrate that's different, but they might be the same guy.
Right.
When it comes to anything of a council, it's usually whoever has influence.
Mhm.
And so it's going to be your money lenders or your nobles and that sort of stuff.
So tell me, Kate.
Yeah.
You ever made a little village that it was ran by a crime boss, not a nice guy mayor?
Yes. I have a couple of different trading posts that are run by crime families of smugglers.
Mm.
And if you go looking in the wrong places, you might not come back.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Tortuga is probably one of my favorite examples of that. It's Pirate City.
Yeah.
It's run by pirates, and power comes from money, and I kill you.
Yep.
That's just how it works.
The threat of "I kill you now" is a very strong one when it comes to running smaller, almost syndicate-like
Mhm.
structures.
Precisely.
Yeah, crime. Always think of the crime as mob bosses.
Mhm.
For sure. So, moving beyond governments, then we're talking a lot about money, so we'll talk about commerce. Within Faerun, we've got a lot of different regions,
Right.
and so we have a wide variety of resources.
Right.
Obviously, food and fishing and those sorts of things, but we've got dwarf communities with mining, we've got lumber, magic items, all these sorts of things that go into that. But then we also have trades guilds and those sorts of things. When it comes to commerce, we're partly influenced again by our map,
Right.
and then we're also going to be we're going to have considerations based on our cultures and governments.
Yep.
So is in Faerun, is there a particular object that's of interest to people when it comes to trade?
When it comes to trade, because of the general lack of ability to preserve fresh foods, a lot of your exotic fruits and your foods that are transported are typically dry goods, smoked goods, things that have been preserved in some way, shape, or form.
Salted pork and things, yeah.
Exactly. But a lot of people rely on the tradeway through the coastal waters to actually get, say, well-made linens, or hey, this particular region has the wood for making barrels and benches and such, so they're primarily craftsmen that do your woodworking, and then that is transported via the coastal way up and down the coast from city to city, so that the places like Waterdeep, where you're closer to a mountain and you have less forest near you, you actually get the wooden goods, but they're at a higher price.
Right.
The things like in El Turiel, where you're in the Heartland, you'll probably get better trade for your like salted fish, smoked fish, and so on.
Things that they don't have access to.
Right. And a lot of your industry is based around cottage industry. So most people in the smaller villages are pretty much self-sufficient.
Right, farming, knitting.
Right, they all kind of band together as a community to supply each other. You'll find in some of the even smaller hamlets, some of the tiny villages, they won't take coin. They'll take trade goods, because coin is worthless when you're in the middle of nowhere and
they've got nowhere to spend
they've got nowhere to spend it, because most villages aren't going to have anywhere to buy things. They're not going to have a general store. They're going to have, oh yeah, Farmer Doug's growing some beets, so I'll trade him a dozen chicken eggs and I'll get the beets, you know, that kind of thing.
For sure. So particularly when it comes to developing commerce, those regional industries, we see a lot with dwarves, right? Dwarves are always in a mountain. They're always mining something. And so, you know, those markets are going to be a lot different than when you're at the elves. You're not going to get a nice bow necessarily from the dwarves. I don't think I've ever seen a metal bow that actually works. But they had machines, so crossbows and things like that. So, you know, they're going to be importing timbers for their needs and selling their ores out, and you're going to have a lot of this sort of thing going on. But, you know, taxes, thieves, transport routes, all that sort of stuff is going to make a big difference. So as you put your world setting together, now that we've located our major landmarks, that we've located our peoples, and we've figured out how their governments work, and we start to figure out how their commerce is put together, those will be things that, you know, they're starting to fully flesh out this world and breathe its life into.
So when you get to this point, you're almost fully fleshed out a country.
Yeah.
Guess what you get to do?
Make another
the whole thing all over again for the
Yeah.
which is why I'm too lazy to do it. So
And
I'll take
that's why I'm torturing myself with Fallout and having to design.
I take the pre-made stuff and add little things here and there. But
Yeah, you don't need to design the state if it's been blown up with nuclear war.
One other fun thing, because
a good chunk
coinage
of it, but
changes, right,
Yes.
from place to place. A lot of major merchants don't actually carry coin per se, but rather trade bars that are guild backed. So they'll have a trade bar, say it's a 5-pound bar of gold worth X number of gold pieces. So when they get from Eldoriel to Baldur's Gate, who don't necessarily use the same currency, they can be like, I've got a trade bar, it's guild backed, I have the money.
Right.
And they can go ahead and make the trades. But a lot of places, a lot of your adventurers are going to collect gold coins, platinum coins, silver, so on and so forth. They may all be minted in different places, but most merchants are going to be like, yeah, it's gold or copper, it's worth roughly the same amount.
I have a mild anecdote on that.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the Dungeons Master's Guide for 5th edition D&D, and when you go to the random treasure tables, one of the objects that you can roll for is gemstones.
Yeah.
And gemstones having a set value makes sense if and only if there is an authority that cuts, inspects, grades, and authorizes these gemstones.
This is where Quinn likes to make it hard on himself.
Not too hard. It's just a matter of logistics.
It's a good point, though.
For sure.
So
in a more realized world setting,
if you have a dwarvish city, and they're constantly digging, so they're going to find gemstones. They're going to get good at cutting those gemstones. They're going to get good at inspecting those gemstones. There's going to be a family whose house carries authoritative weight with their name. So whenever my players found these gemstones, they could find uncut or uninspected gemstones, and they could barter those gemstones for how much they would be worth. They would also find gemstones in boxes. Open that box, there's a gemstone, there's a folded note. That is a certificate of authenticity. It's got that dwarvish family's name on it. This is how much the gem is worth. Set in stone. Nobody's going to barter for it. They're just going to accept it as is.
So does that gemstone have a serial number engraved on it?
Nope. And that's what makes it interesting.
But that's the same kind of idea as the trade bars that the merchants
exactly.
use.
It's the same idea.
Instead of using a precious metal, though, they're using something that the dwarves have found and are like, hey, we have a surplus of this. Why don't we make this the currency and just back it with, this is what this is worth?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the trade in the city of Sigil in Planescape is very difficult at the best, because it's where 54 different planes of existence meet. So you have a explosive plethora of races and cultures and things that every culture thinks is valuable to them.
Right.
That's what they want to use for currency. As an example, Dark Sun, gold is abundant. Steel is extremely rare, so steel is very valuable to them. Well, you go to another world setting where steel is abundant and gold is valuable, they're seen as a nutcase because they want to carry the scraps of steel, because to them that's valuable.
Right.
You put the 5 daggers down and pick up the patch of gold.
Go to buy something in Ravenloft. It's like, yeah, gold is
For
nice,
a
but
native
yeah, silver.
a Native American
Right.
game that I ran, the basic trading good was a knife. Everyone used knives. Everyone needed knives. Knives were hard to make.
Yeah.
Even to the American Indian, a knife is not only seen as a trade good, but it has a lot of status behind it
there was
as well.
cultural.
Yeah.
A lot of cultural status behind having a really good knife. So just because something is valuable to one culture doesn't necessarily mean it's valuable to another. And so when you have these two cultures meeting, and when they're finagling over how much something is worth, you ever watch Star Trek? DS9, when Quark is bargaining with somebody, trying to get them to bargain over something,
Yeah.
he says, "I'll give you 5 bricks of gold pressed latinum." And this alien, he says, "What's that?"
Yes.
And his look on his
Yeah.
face was, "Oh my God, what have I gotten into?"
Yeah, he had no
He had no
currency,
point of
common-
reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No common point of reference. So whenever you put up these little things, especially in trade towns or border towns, you're going to come across any kind of odd stuff.
Right.
People try to use as currency.
So that gemstone and the printed metal idea won't work if you don't have a society at least as interconnected as Faerun or as
Right.
the Sword Coast,
Yes.
where you have active trade lines. If you're dealing with Fallout in the post-apocalypse, nobody's going to care about your gemstones.
Right.
No.
There is another fun form of currency in Faerun that I just want to mention real
Go
quick.
ahead.
Yes.
There are merfolk
Oh yeah.
that live in the
there's-
coastal waters.
Some of them will trade. Yeah.
They will trade pearls.
Mhm.
They won't
Nice.
take gold, they won't take silver, they will trade you pearls. And they have to be very specific quality pearls. And so there's a wet value and a dry value for pearls in Faerun. So wet value is what the merfolk will give you for it, and dry value is what
The
the landfolk will give you for it.
That's nifty.
It's such a neat little
that has,
way to trade.
if you were
that has a
playing
lot of
pirate
historical precedent
campaign
in
or
calorie
something-
shells.
Yeah, but particularly if you're playing a pirate campaign, that's a huge deal.
It is.
You're
And
getting around the
so
moonshales and
the
stuff.
Moonshay
Yeah.
Isles and so on, that's a huge piracy area. There's a bunch of different little nooks and crannies where little pirate shanty towns are. And I can guarantee you they trade with
Pearls.
the merfolk.
Oh, for
Even
100%.
pearls.
So very cool.
I like
what?
that whole idea. I mean, my mind's just going.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah. So what was
I want pirates and merfolk to train with limestone donuts.
You're fine.
There's also, I
No, I'm not,
cannot
'cause
remember
it's
the name of the
historical.
society, but there's also another society that their currency is thinly shaved discs of ivory
Yeah.
that are beaded on strings, and I cannot remember the name of that particular one.
Mm.
And it's also a part of the world of Toro.
Yeah. Is that over in the island of Cholt?
I think
that's the
so.
stuff- I think
Feels
that
kind of chill.
comes. Yeah. I think it comes from over there where we see Tomb of Annihilation and some
Yeah.
of the stuff that you do over there.
Again, it's just the varying forms of currency and how the trade works is just fascinating to me.
This is one of the things when you examine it, it speaks to how long Forgotten Realms has been developed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not you can see this level of detail in other pre-written world settings, but oftentimes they don't bother, right? Because the whole
Right.
idea is to put the backdrop for your stories and you go epic adventure. Forgotten Realms has the detail that you can really be quite nerdy with it,
Oh yeah.
and that's a lot of fun. I think it's part of the reason why Forgotten Realms has had the staying power that it's got.
It's had over 250 plus novels
Yeah.
written for it. So I mean, it's got enough background you could chew on it for the rest of your life and still find new stuff.
Oh yeah. Speaking of stuff, let's talk a little bit about how Faerun. What? You got some.
On our chat,
Yeah.
Shin Neo
Let me know, Neo.
has been talking here with Mr. Producer.
Yeah.
Chit-chat.
I'm gonna. They've been talking about things that we're not talking about, so I don't know what show they're watching, but
Well, Shin Neo
What are we
thinks.
discussing?
Well,
it sounds like a better channel than what we're doing.
no, well, Shin Neo should be asking personal questions in the Discord server, not on the Twitch channel. First off, but
It's engagement.
shut up. We are glad to have him. Shin Neo streams a lot, and we've got notifications set up. So if you guys like to check out some of the games that Shin's playing, hit up the announcements page when he's streaming.
What does
Currently
she
talking
play?
about
A lot of different things.
currently talking about doing a Starship Troopers tabletop.
Yeah, he's tried that like 5 times, and we wish him luck.
Trying to
Because
get
it's-
people together is always a nightmare.
Yeah, as usual. But
Once you get a group, though, they're trapped.
for sure, by bugs. Nuke 'em. But some of the magic versus technology, when we're looking at world settings generally, right? So, Wild West, we're dealing with a level of technology that's not modern, but we're not necessarily getting into magic either. Technology is not necessarily steam engines and that sort of stuff. Toril has a lot of technologies such as granaries, farming techniques, shipping,
Right.
mining techniques. This is
Right.
all technologies. But we also have a high level of magic in the Forgotten Realms world setting.
Right.
So we don't necessarily. Now, I was looking for it earlier, I missed it, but Spelljammer was something that we've got access to in 2nd edition. In the official canonical timeline, somewhere early in its timeline, they actually record the first sighting of a Spelljammer. And one of the 2nd edition modules is around the ruins of a downed Spelljammer ship.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes. So, if you want to have your adventures in space, there's already some canonical inclusion of Spelljammers deep in the histories of Forgotten Realms, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
But again, they're powered by magic. They're not a technological space shuttle or something like that.
Right.
But there's still when we talk about tech, it's not just that it's Star Wars.
Well, sure.
It's everything revolves around tech. You have wheels, you have levers,
Right.
you have on a ship, you have
Rope and
ropes,
pulley.
ropes and pulleys.
Yeah, that system.
Right. So that's a certain level of technology that makes all of that kind of stuff work. And so when you have tech versus magic, some places you'll have more magic than you'll have tech because they rely heavily on magic to do mundane things like pull a wagon. So don't just think of it as is it Star Trek or is it Excalibur, and somewhere in between.
Right.
But there will be things of technology. You're going to have wagons. You're going to have levers. You're going to have different things that people use day to day.
Even going down the road, right? So if I leave Neverwinter and I go down to a farming community, my level of magic that I'm encountering has changed.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely, sure.
the guy with the ox and the plowing his field is not over there casting plow field.
Right. So, from what I've read and what I understand about it, most of your tech level for the Forgotten Realms is 13th to 14th century
Right.
That
artwork.
sounds
This is
pretty.
where we get to.
Yeah.
So it's the analog of what you can anticipate to encounter.
Right.
Yeah, very much 13, 14.
So that's early Renaissance, prior gunpowder.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, gunpowder.
Just on the edge, I'm
Just
sure.
on the edge.
Yeah.
You can start
Are the-
creeping into it.
Right, which
But-
brings in the artificer class from Eberron,
Right.
and we've so that's
Yeah.
it's particularly when you have these other communities where when you're dealing with it on a world setting level as you're writing this or modifying, we don't have gunpowder widespread,
right.
but goblins, kobolds, and
They're
dwarves
getting
may
there.
have blasting or other techniques in their
Right.
mining that haven't made it into weaponization or other applications.
Because
I call it fire sand in my campaign.
there are other items that explode besides gunpowder.
Right.
Like fireball.
And that's part of the point is when you have magic of the level that Faerun does, typically, unless you're in the
Yeah.
middle of the spell plague and there's, dead zones everywhere, or the weave has ripped apart and you no longer have access to it. But the level of magic outweighs the usefulness in a lot of ways of black powder. Why waste time with something that I have to fumble with and fight with to shoot or to blow up when the wizard can just point and shoot, a big explosion?
Accessibility.
Yeah.
Because your average peasant can't cast fireball, but they can learn within a few days how to aim, load, and fire a rifle.
But price then becomes the problem, because at that point,
Yes.
you still have the lack of circulation of said item.
The necessity for machining and the careful chemistry of crafting the gunpowder.
Right. Well, so yeah, utility becomes the big part of it, particularly so. Where Faerun has such a high level of magic, almost anyone canonically can go and learn at least magic at a basic level.
Right.
So cantrips and maybe first level spells. So with it being fairly accessible, there's less impetus on the development of other technologies. At least in some of the major regions where you can go and find a lot of people who can be fairly skilled with magic, and then go and blow up mountains and do your mining and that sort of stuff.
That's one of the whole technology versus magic. When I was running Planescape real heavily, there's so many races that rely heavily on magic. Races that have magic innate to them.
Mm-hmm.
Elves do to a certain point, but Tieflings can to a certain point. There's other races out there that do. And so there's things that they do just on a daily basis that they no longer consider magic.
It's just utility.
It's just what they do.
Yeah.
And so when those creatures meet your heroes at a tavern and they're doing one thing or another, and they just saw that guy light a fire by just looking at the table, they're like, how did you do that? I didn't see him pull components out of his pouch, or pull a flint and steel out and do this and do that. How did you do that? But when you go to describe your world setting, technology and magic will be in there at some level.
Right.
So when you're creating your world from scratch, or like I say from the ground up, you need to determine where you want your level of technology. So Faerun sounds like they're 13th century pre-gunpowder, which is a fun time in European history. It's a very volatile time in European history. Everybody's killing. Everybody's killing everybody.
Lots of drama.
Lots of drama.
Plague too.
There's a lot of plague.
So you got mounted horses, and you got knights in armor, and
a decent level of industry.
Yeah,
that was fairly consistent across a large portion of the area. Yeah.
So there's level of technology, and you take your fantasy world and throw in all the magic that you want. I don't necessarily want to overpower it though, because that's where you get wars with dragons,
which has happened.
So
more than once.
You got to find a balance in there. And any place you don't have a balance is where one's going to overpower the other.
Right.
I think also in Lord of the Rings, when Saruman is making all the works out of the ground, there's a certain level of technology that is being used for all that.
Right.
All the crazy
the
bridges and
the magic technology intersections get to be interesting when you have technology powered by magic.
Right.
Final Fantasy's got a whole section where cultures are built around those applications because they don't have access to magic otherwise.
Look at the use of airships.
Yeah.
A lot of airships that are utilized in fantasy games are typically powered by some form of magic, be it a bound elemental, or a continuous spell, or
crystals.
an enchantment.
It's always crystals.
It's always crystals. Yeah.
I mean, you also have the potential for say a water elemental has been bound to your city. To the sewer system, and is what is responsible for cycling all the water through the city.
Yeah, and we've seen some of that in some of the modules that we've highlighted for our workshops, where you're going down into this catacomb to find this sunken ship. Well, you think you're just swimming in this sunken mine, and it's really the water elemental that is finally tired of your crap at the end of it. You're like, oh, the water receded. Oh, it's water elemental. We weren't ready for that. So yeah, certainly when you run into those sort of fantastical magic elements, they can be pretty fun. But yeah, their application can be technological in presentation, but have an intersection with magic.
Yep.
And that intersection is always very interesting. I have this vague memory of a way long time ago where I described the dwarves having this magical glowstone that was used to power their cities and their weaponry, and its only inherent property is that it glowed in the dark, and only creatures with dark vision could actually see it glow. And it generated a lot of heat, especially when you got a lot of it together. It was uranium.
God. Stop killing everything with uranium.
But they taste so good.
Plutonium, they learned plutonium tastes sweet.
Oh no.
Slight sour twinge to it.
Just because it's called yellow cake don't mean you can eat it.
Lemon uranium.
Stop me.
And this is why you're into Fallout now.
Yes.
That's where your hair was.
I'm gonna stick in the fantasy realm. I'll leave the uranium and the plutonium to you.
Thank you. It's fine.
With
They're
Forgotten
mere
Realms
uranium.
having a fairly high level of magic, one of the things that comes into magic versus technology is how it's responded or reacted to.
Mhm.
When the wizard
Sure.
goes, haha, prestidigitation, and I got a little candle flame and I light my pipe, that doesn't bother anybody.
Typically.
Typically. But some cultures, again, as we talked about, that don't have as much access to magic, or it's not as mundane to them,
Yeah.
may react in different ways. So these are things when you're talking about magic and technology in your world setting, or you're exploring new areas of a world setting, to keep in mind, what might be mundane to me is completely unknown to them, and they may react in this way or that.
Dark Sun hates magic users.
For
I should
instance,
play Dark Sun.
You have basically natural magic,
Right.
which your druids and so on use. You have arcane magic, and then you have divine magic, right? Well, sometimes
Bloody man.
some cultures may view that arcane magic is blasphemous, and they may only allow divine magic.
Right.
And practitioners of arcane magics can be
Spiteful.
arrested,
Sure.
thrown in jail,
Persecuted.
persecuted.
Yeah. And we see some of that when you get into the Mazteca setting. Based largely on Maya and Aztec cultures, the way that they expressed and interacted with magic was not your standard arcane spellcaster, but more of a sort of a druidic or shamanistic expression of magic.
Right.
And so, yeah, if you sail your boat over there and you're like, fireball, and they're like, that's a demon.
No.
Yeah, and to your point, they're gonna have a completely different view on how you're doing magic. They might, react very poorly to it.
It's like the school of restoration versus the school of necromancy.
Oh yeah,
Technically
Ooh.
speaking,
two sides of the same.
two sides of the same coin. Because you can restore by bringing the body back to a half-life,
Right.
or you can restore by actually reviving, but
Yeah.
the
Well,
balance is kind of weird.
Also, to your point, there are good aligned necromancers
There are.
that their job is to keep the dead dead.
White
Mhm.
necromancers.
Yes, I've played a couple as clerics, and it's pretty interesting to do that, where you're out, putting the undead back in the ground.
Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep.
We already,
There's some in Playscape, the city of Sigil. They work the city morgue, and their whole purpose is to make sure that your soul gets to your home.
yeah, they.
Yeah.
Let's get you where you belong.
Yeah.
But to the point of reacting poorly to magic, the person who runs the city morgue is a powerful lich.
Yes.
So he's the one with the book that he does all the paperwork. He is the city mortician, is a ultra powerful lich.
I love that so
and
much.
and the guys that work for him are like demi liches and high level clerics of necromancy and stuff. But they manage the morgue of plain Sigil.
Right.
And then as a normal adventurer, and you show up, you're like, "That's a lich!" He's like, "I'm going to my job, guy."
I'm just doing my 9 to 5. Leave me out of it.
Yeah. He's like, "I'm late. I got to get down there before the souls get all backed up."
So
I
one
love
of
the
one of the
mundane
encounters
bureaucracy
that I
of
threw together
hyper-magical, extra
to
dimensional
introduce the
spaces.
players to some of
Yeah.
these odd characters that are in the city of Sigil. I do a lot of that at the fancy restaurant. So as they're walking down the street, they see the lich dressed like the classic mortician out of the Old West with a top hat and tails with his entourage going into the restaurant. And they're like,
Fantastic.
They're grabbing a beer after work.
That
Right?
makes so much sense.
A
I love it
lich
so
with a
much.
southern accent.
so they're all going in
Yeah.
and they're like, well, we're going to follow them. And they go in and the maitre d knows who they are, takes them over to their table because it's reserved for them, and they're just like having a coming apart. And there's all these other creatures that most have never seen or heard tale of in this same restaurant. And you're looking around and like, so what are you guys going to do now? Half the party said, I'm leaving. I'm gonna go.
I obviously have no idea what I'm doing, and I need to get out of here.
Detect evil.
As they're coming in, the maitre d hands them a menu and asks if they'd care to be seated, and that's where I give the players an actual copy of the menu.
Yeah,
and they leave with it. They're like, no.
I mean, I would go have a seat. I would be like, yes, I would like to try this place. This seems like an interesting neutral ground.
It is. But what's funny is what they're considering exotic, expensive food. You back home, you're like
Peasant food.
Yeah, I like.
BLZ, $35.
This is what I eat every day.
Or sometimes the guy's like, I hope that's good squirrel. I haven't had good squirrel in a while. It's not since I left the farm to go fight the orcs.
But there's a lot of oddity things like that in the city of Sigil makes sense when you see these things that are completely unrelated in the same location. It's just a bunch of people going to dinner.
Yeah.
Granted, they're from all walks of life and
unlife.
Got a minotaur dating a womanitar.
Yeah. So there's all these odd things.
And the producer's being snarky again.
For sure. It was the same idea with
yes.
Magic and Tech. So if
Magic
I show up with a Gatling gun in Waterdeep.
Boy, that'd cause an interesting reaction from the city watch and the city guard.
That's definitely
especially when half of the Thieves Guild's obliterated in a single night.
Yeah. Especially considering...
I'm thinking the old Sal Crank, but yeah.
Oh, no. Especially considering in most cases, the Thieves Guilds are actually operated and recognized by the city.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got an office in the back.
Yeah.
They're not called the Thieves Guild, they're called the IRS.
Usually if you look into the history of those big cities, you'll find where there used to be gang wars, and the city stepped in and to get the fighting stopped and killing stopped.
They had to recognize somebody.
This is your area, this is their area. Stop it.
Yeah.
And everything goes on in that area is theirs. Everything goes in this area is theirs. So, but the killing stopped.
Yeah.
Mostly.
So that's a little bit on Magic and Tech. Let's talk about some of the crazy monsters that we're going to find as we get into our adventures. Now that we have a world setting established, we're going to start telling our stories. We have threats, monsters or antagonists of some kind. We've seen where we've got demons at some point, orcs at others, bandits, whatever it happens to be, mundane to fantastical, monster types and other threats. What are some of the special monsters that we see most often, outside of your like zombie or goblin?
Honestly, the first off the top of my head comes the Yuan-Ti.
There we go. So that one is very interesting.
From the Sarakur of the Days of Thunder.
Yes. So Sarakur is another region of Toril. And when they show up in Faerun, you kind of take notice of the Yuan-Ti. They're snake people.
Snake people.
Yes.
Snake people. Most notably known for their brilliant red eyes.
Cool.
They're probably the same snake people that you just did a whole Call of Cthulhu campaign about.
Oh, you think so? Are they seriously?
No, they're very similar. Where's past Karatur?
Well,
the Sarakur, if I remember correctly, were a part of the original groups in Toril.
Yeah.
And then the Yuan-Ti are descended from them, and they're kind of a hybrid. They're like a half snake, half person.
Yeah, they tend to have that like snake lower, humanoid upper.
Although some have.
Do they disguise themselves as people?
No, they're not. No, they're not. They're full lizard people.
Oh.
They're snake people.
But some of them.
Not the ones from Call of Cthulhu.
Some of the Yuan-Ti have the body of a human, and the arms are snake-like.
Snake, yeah. So Serpentis limbus.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Yuan-Ti
they do have some interesting variations because they're just sort of hybridized snake humanoid monsters. So.
And then you have the purebloods, and boy, are they nose in the air, haughty about it. They're
the kind of snakes that you like. If you're going to go on your Indiana Jones style adventure, though, you end up in a catacombs full of Yuan-Ti, and you hate every minute of it.
Yep.
You're waiting for the guy with the biplane landed in the river to come get you out of there, because
Yep. Throw me a rope.
That's Reggie.
yeah,
Throw that snake. That's Reggie.
Snake in my boot.
for sure. But the Yanti are very interesting, and you don't really encounter them outside of Forgotten Realms.
Not really. And there's a whole forest, the Forest of Worms,
Mhm.
where their main stronghold and the main groups of them are found.
Right.
And I don't want to find them on a bad day.
Don't want to find them. There you
When
go.
you say
Don't want to find
worms,
one
you
in my
mean
sleeping bag.
what kind of worms?
They're
Great
they're-
worms.
Dragons.
Mhm.
Okay.
Worms.
Yeah.
I was thinking
Worms.
I was thinking
Yeah.
purple worm.
Worms.
I mean, we could pull that out too. That's fine. Those
What?
things are great.
I like
Yeah.
purple worms.
The one thing I do really like is Forgotten Realms take on the kobold
Ah.
and their complete bloodlust hatred for the gnomes.
Yeah.
Because they're both burrowing societies, but kobolds, particularly from Forgotten Realms, are a dragon kin of some kind. They were created way back when the dragons needed minions.
And they typically worship and revere the dragons as much as they can, even
Yeah.
though they have a tendency to get sacrificed by the dragons. I don't
Yeah, but-
understand.
Well, that's what happened. Yeah, so but they breed in large numbers, and they always tend to be written off as sort of like a nuisance. Your level 1 to 3 guys might fight some kobolds, and then you move on to bigger stuff like orcs. But kobolds as a subterranean race, and with there being so much underground, so the Undermountain and then the Underdark, the kobolds running into them in their mining communities and the way that their culture is actually set up, it's just an interesting take, because a lot of times if you see them in like Forgotten Realms, not Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk,
Mhm.
some of the earlier pictures made them more rodent-like, and they've always
Yeah.
more nuisancey, never really organized or have a whole sort of focus. They were just there to be kind of a background monster. So I like the way that Forgotten Realms put together kobolds.
I think 5th edition kind of helped with that because they expanded it a little bit and actually went into some of the kobold culture and how their society works.
Yeah, and then there wasn't Modern Kingdoms of Souls, it was the other one, the
Fizbin.
well, the Monsters of the Multiverse.
Monsters of the Multiverse also.
Yeah,
But Fizbin's also, the Fizbin's Treasury of Dragons also goes into...
Well, that gives you the
Fizbin's.
lore. But Monsters of the Multiverse actually gives you rules for creating a kobold PC.
Gotcha.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Those are fun.
so including the rare winged kobold, who has a high status in the society because he's dragon enough to have wings.
Are
They're
they
called
functional?
Urds.
Yeah.
They're called what?
Erd.
Erd?
Yeah, they're called the Urds.
I just sworn I heard a T or something.
Right. When you think of some of the crazy stuff that you've encountered in Forgotten Realms, where do you go with some of the monsters?
Well, I go back to what she was talking about. The blue fire split the world in half, and now there's all these other creatures. Can't
Yeah.
call them demons. These creatures are coming out of the ground and everything. I'm like, that sounds. I don't want to be there.
The drow, as far as elf lore goes, is sees itself across a lot of the world settings. We see it creeping a little bit to Greyhawk and a little bit to Dragonlance, but particularly you won't find them in numbers with cities and things like that outside of the Forgotten Realms.
Right.
Right. And
And-
the drow as a group are a very interesting read. It's just
Yeah.
how they organized their goddess, and just everything they do and how they act as individuals, how they act as groups.
Mhm.
To me is very interesting.
They
Because
have
typically you won't find that many evil people
in one
cooperative.
space.
Yeah, cooperative with each other.
They have a very heavy matriarch society,
Yeah.
and their primary motivations are fear. For the lower ranks, anyways. The upper ranks, they do what they want. They play games using the lives of their minions.
Yeah, it's very much a tyranny. It's it's almost like a king, but they've got different levels in their society where you can carve out sort of baronies. And if you have some talent, you can rise above your
Mhm.
station, but only to a point if you're male.
Right.
Um,
If you're male, you're capped. There's only so much you can do.
right. Which is part of the reason why we see, Drizzt and things go out. But one of the things that's not well known is there is one city of Drow on the surface. And they're daylight adapted and that sort of stuff, and they're a small community and they keep to themselves. It starts with a C. I'll have to find it in my book over here. But typically, if you were to play a Drow elf character starting in 3rd edition, that was where you came from.
Makes sense.
And that way you weren't locked into evil. You weren't trying to enslave everybody.
Right, because
and you weren't necessarily removed from that culture, but you didn't have that same cultural pressure coming from that city. So I'll find that here for you. But yeah, if you're in Menzoberranzan, if you're that Drow, you definitely have a lawful or chaotic evil bent, and just for the way the morality there works versus what you'd find on the surface, and the directives of Loth and the Dryads. And that's another one. Oh god, Dryads.
Oh, love them. Love them. Half spider, half man.
Driders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Driders.
I find it fun and fascinating that the Underdark and the surface world are pretty much mirrors of one another that are inverted.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very clever way to give adventurers that, okay, we've done what we want to do on the surface, but we really want to challenge ourselves. Let's go into the dark. Let's see what's down there.
Yeah. So the region was Cormanther. They've got a settlement there. And then it was also available to some of the Drow that were in the region of the Underdark called the North Dark. Particularly when they could get out of the Underdark after the mountain exploded.
that does help when a mountain has exploded. Oh, hey, there's actually a passage.
And so they've had enough exposure to sunlight that, for being underground for 2,000 years, they have really great night vision compared to other elves, but bright lights were a huge hindrance to them. And so they had special gear and different things that would counter it, but they had to be in the sunlight long enough to adapt back to it.
Right.
So there's some of the interesting threats and things that we'll see. We've covered a bit of the lore, I think, some of the big lore. But I wanted to talk about some of the religion. We skimmed over that a little bit, but there's a huge pantheon of gods. My favorite is Tyr, but there's a little over 15 that cover everything. They've got justice, the harvest, thieves.
The Faeronian pantheon.
Holy crap! There's way more than that.
There is a huge pantheon,
and that's
here.
not the end of it. Would you mind? Look,
Yeah.
I gotta pull up my guys.
There is a pantheon that covers pretty much every end of the spectrum when it comes to Faerun. And in cities like Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep, you can actually find worshippers of pretty much every single one of those deities, be it good or evil aligned.
Right.
I actually found right up for a church that's in Athkatla, one of the capital cities, and it isn't a church
Brandobarus
for it's not like a church to a god; it's a church for worship. So all the different religions come to this place so they can do
their worship in one place.
So Quinn also is reminded us. So he's got the Elven Pantheon, the Drow-specific Pantheon, and the Halflings, adding an additional...
and the Dwarven. Don't forget the Dwarven.
So,
I have probably made a cleric of each of those Halfling gods.
Fantastic. But yeah, there is a deity for everyone. Like, this first page is just the generic... What the majority of the human pantheon and the oldest pantheons are, aside from the elves and the dwarves.
And this is definitely expanded. I haven't had a chance to read through the full Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. I kind of flipped and mostly to the later stuff. But I know in 2nd edition, we kind of took what we had out of Greyhawk or some of the Legends lore, and we were like, all right, we got this list of them, change their names, and that's their spheres now. So it definitely looks like through the development of the world setting, we've had quite a lot of additional deities and things.
And here in 2nd edition, we've got a lot of them, and they even show how the priests normally dress.
Fantastic.
The priest with the giant chicken head is quite different.
Yeah.
Torm. The chicken god.
Yeah.
In direct opposition to the snake god lady.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it's a brief section in here. There's definitely not as many listed in this second edition book as there are listed in fifth.
right.
But the artwork of how the priests dress, I thought was rather amusing.
It is
Move that up
fantastic.
closer to the camera here, Dan.
Which one?
It's this
That's
one right here.
Stormtrooper.
There you
Oh, no, it's the penguin.
Nice.
I'm the penguin. I'm on the penguin.
When you have a full page and then another basically full page worth of deities listed, that's just a lot of deities.
Yep.
And now you understand why there's so many religious wars in Faerun. Everybody's arguing all the time about who's right.
Yes.
I'll say it again. There is no war like a holy war.
One of my favorite
Because
wars
of
that I
all
ever
the wars
ran was a
going
war between the storm god Talos, the chaotic evil
Uh-huh.
storm god Talos, and the halfling weather deity. I believe her name is Shirilale or something like that. It's SH something or other. We called her Shelby.
Yeah,
Yep. They
Agriculture.
had
Sheila
Yeah.
Sheila Periol is what I
Sheila Periel.
goddess of agriculture and weather,
They
There
had
you
a
go.
fight.
nature and tempest.
And
That would be
and
quite
our
the fight.
our group's cleric of Talos was like, yeah, I'm gonna convert, and they turned him into a halfling.
Oh no.
An angel, a halfling angel came down, poked his nose, he turned into a halfling. It
Fantastic.
was awesome.
You've been
Probably-
accepted into the program.
Probably didn't want to convert that much.
Well, he didn't have much.
Oh, and
choice.
pardon me, there's also then the Gnomish pantheon and the Orc pantheon.
Oh, they're way back there. Yeah. So I can't forget about Groomsh. Was pretty-
Grumsh,
Yeah. Is it? am I-
God of
No, yeah, Groomsh.
Grumsh,
Groomsh. There's no is. It's just Groomsh.
Grumsh, god of storms and war.
Yeah, mostly war.
Mostly war.
War.
War storms.
Yeah.
Grimsh one eye.
The fun thing about the Sword Coast and the handy thing for me is because each deity actually does have an entry that gives a little bit of their history
Mhm.
and what they do and what they're known for.
Yeah, particularly when you create a pantheon of gods in your world setting, they need, aside from having followers or this or that, or areas of their responsibility, knowing what their influence actually is,
Right.
because you can have, what the people think and what is actually going on, you can separate those. But knowing where you can actually find their influence, and you'll actually find their followers, or if they're going to be active in your setting, where your characters in the setting can petition them for aid or find succor from their regions is important. But with such a high magic setting as Faerun, it's nice to have a large pantheon,
Mm-hmm.
because now I can play a cleric and orient that cleric in the direction of the story, right? So if
Right.
it's wartime, obviously you're gonna have war clerics out, leading their charge, or you're gonna have
Clerics of Torm, for instance.
yeah. My favorite, again, cleric of Tyr with a big hammer, Justice hammer, good by me. But if you got a campaign that's gonna be dealing with more undead, the necromancers, the life domain clerics, those sorts of things,
Right.
and there's plenty to choose from. So whether you're a halfling or you want to go from the dwarven, elvish, or human pantheons, you've got access to those.
Galan would be the god of death in the halfling pantheon. He's got a dog with him. It's a sheepdog.
That's
And
nice.
it shepherds
So
souls to the afterlife.
We covered several of the deities, and I was looking through there. So you have deities, you have greater gods, lesser gods, or demigods, but
Right.
some pantheons also have heroes who are immortals that serve their god.
Mhm.
Example through Greek history would be
Hercules.
Hercules.
Yeah.
Hercules was immortal; he served the gods, but he openly chastised others. So, does Forgotten Realms have any true heroes other than the brave adventurers?
I can answer that. So we see things. They're called the Chosen. Elminster is the first one
yeah.
that comes to mind. A high level, beyond level 20, and some of the write-ups I've seen, third edition, particularly when they had epic levels.
Yeah.
I think he's a Chosen of Mistra.
Yeah, he is a direct channel and an anchor to the weave
Yeah.
for her.
So some of the heroes that there are several detailed have direct connections or are chosen specifically by certain deities to perform functions for them, or in this connection. Because to be chosen is not just like, haha, I'm a champion. That represents an actual connection. You're either empowered or given responsibility in some way. And so the champions do exist in this lore as well.
Yeah.
Ignore me.
Yes.
My phone died. I tried to turn it on, realized it would make a loud noise, and was like, nope, pull the battery out.
So, what about unique character classes or skills or spells that you're going to find in Forgotten Realms? You're not going to find anywhere else.
First thing that pops to my mind is Mordenkainen.
Mordenkainen?
Yeah, Mordenkainen. I can never say the bigger words.
I call him Morty.
Morty words.
Morty!
Morty.
Anything that the Drow has in their specific spells. They've got
that would be true, yes.
several different flavors of like the hold persons and their poisons, and anything that comes from the Underdark, the Druger, which are the dark dwarves, and the way that they have different, they favor man catchers and nets and things of that nature over warhammers and spears. So you'll see a lot of those things that are specific to those different cultures. Beyond that, the book has several spells that are specific and several spells that are different in the way that they function in Forgotten Realms. So you'll find that in the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide at least. And I think the Adventurers book there, that second edition one, also has a section detailing expanded spell list. Same thing for third edition.
It did.
So
it did, and I've read it. I want to see if you knew it.
There are also expanded backgrounds.
Okay, so specific, for the fifth edition setting.
For the 5th edition setting, there's the City Watch, which is most useful for, say, Waterdeep.
Right.
There's Clan Crafter. So if you're a dwarf, clan.
Oh, clan.
Not clam, clan. Okay. And then there's Cloistered Scholar. So like say Candlekeep.
Oh yeah.
You've been an avowed of Candlekeep. You've been studying to try to get into Candlekeep to become one of the avowed. You could be a scholar. Close enough. Cloistered Scholar. There we go. There's a courtier.
Okay.
There's also a faction agent background. So there are different factions on the Sword Coast. You have the Harpers, you have the Order of the Gauntlet, the Emerald Enclave, you have the Lord's Alliance, and then you have the Zentarum.
Yeah. So these are all character backgrounds when you're making a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, that are going to be specific.
That are specific to Faerun.
Right. So what a lot of people overlook are even in 5th edition. Those are character descriptions when you're making your character, but those are characters that exist now. They wouldn't be a stereotype if they weren't true.
For sure.
So you have these types of people with these types of skills that you as a DM should put different places.
Right.
To help add the flavor of the setting.
Same thing if you're going to create a place that you're going to put in this world setting, you can use this material to create those NPCs. Or if you're going to be creating a new world setting of your own, but you're playing in 5th edition, backgrounds you may want to borrow or adjust or create new backgrounds for that setting that you're writing as well.
Right. One good example for something that I've placed into my ongoing campaign, I have the Emerald Enclave. And there are faction agents seated throughout the wilds. And in different places, like the small villages and hamlets, there are different members of the Emerald Enclave whose duty is to protect the natural order of the world and to help keep nature and civilization in check.
Right.
So that's an opposing force at times and a helpful force at others.
So of these, which ones do you like the most? Of
the backgrounds?
Yeah. Do you have a favorite?
I personally favor Far Traveler. Far Traveler is a background for someone who's from somewhere other than the Sword Coast. So say from Mystica.
Yeah.
Say you're from there. That makes everything in the Sword Coast brand new to you. You don't know anything about the world. You don't know anything about this continent. You don't know anything about the culture. You are learning everything for the first time.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a a background that gives you a reason. You've been on a journey. You're exploring the world beyond your homeland. And it gives you a chance as an adventurer to see Faerun as a whole new place. And then you have a reason to ask, well, I don't know anything about who runs Waterdeep. Who's in charge here? What do they do? What is this
makes
place?
sense for a first-time player. So
And I
that's
run
cool.
a lot of games for beginners, and I recommend Far Traveler as a background option.
That's nice to have something in the mechanics that allows that window, because you're not going to necessarily have the opportunity from a new player to separate their role play from the player. So just build that into it. Make the character have no knowledge like the player, and then educate them both at the same time.
Yep.
That's really a cool way to do that.
That's why it's my favorite. It's a perfect window to be like, you know nothing about this world. Cool, here we go.
And we're just gonna dump you in there.
I'm gonna teach you on the fly.
Grab him by the shirt collar and throw him face first.
Yep.
One of the brand new characters in my campaign decided to take augury. So every once in a while when they're stuck, it's like, hey, do you need a hint from the universe?
For sure.
Slap in the back of the head. What about the monsters? I mean, we talked a little bit about the ones coming up out of the ground because of the blue fires. Are any other monsters that are unique to Forgotten Realms, Faerun, that you're going to run into in more than one location?
The way they do orcs is a little bit different than we see them in Greyhawk. They're quite a bit more organized. They tend to have enclaves, and the way that the orc chieftains operates more what we'd see described from the Tiger Nomads. And but Greyhawk, the orcs exist, and they're usually more your generic bad guy. I mean, you don't tend to see them a whole lot.
Right.
Versus half orcs have always been fairly predominant in the Forgotten Realms setting, and that has because of that made orcs more predominant in the setting.
Right.
And so the cultures they come from, why they do or do not accept a half orc into their communities, like this one will reject it, this one will accept it. That's more fleshed out. And so, particularly with the god Grumsh, we don't talk about the pantheon of orcs largely in the other world settings, but we know about it in Forgotten Realms. And so we've got more to pull from, more motivation in an orc antagonist, more ways to pull the clans together to really turn them into a real problem for the rest of the world. There's a lot that you can do with orcs. There's a lot of information that lends itself to working with the orcs. Outside of their raiding farms, they've beat up some goblins, and they're making the goblins their henchmen, sort of stuff. We saw a lot of that in Lord of the Rings, and so that came forward into Greyhawk as Gygax developed 5th edition from the white box, or not 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons from the white box.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a huge influence, but we didn't have a whole lot as far as the orcs' motivations and things were concerned. They were the bad guys. We had the One Ring and all that stuff that was going on, and so we see them just as the bad guys in some of those other settings, and not, when we get to Forgotten Realms, who are their gods, how do they conduct warfare, how do they live, who are their allies, and that sort of stuff.
In a lot of the orcs that I've encountered in the Forgotten Realms is actually through like R.A. Salvatore's novels. A lot of the times the motivation is raiding for food, raiding for territory, or simply trying to migrate to a place that is better than where they are. They are a very warlike people, so they're very prone to starting a fight constantly. A lot of your half orcs are typically rejected because they aren't strong enough. To keep up.
A lot like the orcs we find in other world settings, theirs is a hard life of survival. And so it means that you have to be strong or you die. And, you have to prove that strength to be of use. And so you see a lot of that. And then particularly Grumsh, when he led the armies and lost his eye back in the lore, he was just tired of getting the crap kicked out of his people. He's like, we're going to go over there and we're going to take it. And he did for quite a long time. And then, of course, the orcs were eventually beat back, and now they're kind of, licking their wounds still. But they're not to be ignored either. which is kind of cool.
So I think we've pretty much covered everything we can cover.
Yeah, that's
in the limited time that we have. In the
Well,
limited
It
time
was
that
a
we have.
lot. It was a lot, though.
for sure. Let's as a recap, in the vein of helping our viewers potentially put a world setting of their own together. We talked about the importance of maps.
I just remembered something
Yes,
before
sir.
we wrap it up, or maybe we can do this during the wrap it up. But Kate brought with her today a special.
We're gonna check that out in a second.
1 second, we'll get there.
So we're gonna do this.
I don't want to forget it.
We're not gonna forget it.
I didn't forget it.
I know.
What are we talking about?
Shut up.
So
Quinn already
I'm starting to feel Three Stooges.
I don't know if I
vibes.
ever knew.
Somebody some help.
Can he take the world traveler thing and
Far traveler.
Far traveler is. No, but we've talked a little bit about the importance of maps, borrowing maps, generating your own, and how those can inform later decisions, such as cultures and governments where they land. Dwarves would like to be in the mountains. Please make sure they have mountains.
We would like to burrow.
Valley dwarves.
Okay, but there
Crag
are
They're all blonde.
there are
Valley dwarfs still exist in between two mountains.
there are hill dwarves versus mountain dwarves. There is a bit of a distinction there, but it's a different thing
Crevice
entirely.
For sure.
dwarves.
Crevice dwarves. We did talk about the extensive history of Forgotten Realms, 35,000 years. And
We summarized it.
We did sort of-
So many books, so much content in general for it.
one of the things that would be kind of interesting, I thought about this as we were getting really big into the research for this, is you create a group of elven adventurers,
Mhm.
and you play all of the published modules from 1st edition to 5th edition.
Woo.
It only covers 200 years.
Only 200 years, yeah,
Elves,
only.
elves could do it,
Elves could do it as long as they don't die.
And some dwarves, yeah.
and some dwarves. Yeah.
But it would be kind of interesting. You're like, we're the heroes of the realm. What do you mean? It's like, we've literally done it all. We did all
Yeah.
of it.
I can't remember.
I'm the chosen of the game master. Done. But
I believe the game was Infinity Blade, where it was a roguelike, not a roguelike, but it was you would go as far as you could, and when you died, it was your son who took you over.
I don't know.
And
That's
it was
interesting.
just I would do
Interesting.
that.
So, yeah. And then, of course, the points. So, history of the world setting, how you need to know what happened before,
Mhm.
so it can inform what happens now and what comes next with your stories. Governments around your cultures, major cities, and locations, how that affects commerce, and magic versus technology, I thought was a pretty good discussion, particularly with Forgotten Realms, because they have such a high level of both.
It's well blended too, and
Yeah.
most societies, especially in the bigger cities, you see a good blend of both magic and technology. You see a lot of innovation and a lot of creativity in how they apply it.
It leaves a lot of room for the dungeon master to come in and have a cool idea and make it work.
Right?
We've talked about some of the interesting monster types and threats that are specific to Forgotten Realms. Don't go into the Undermountain. There's illithids and mind flayers. Don't go to the Underdark.
But there are
There's a whole-
flumps.
there's a
Those are
whole
actually
line
kind of
for
fun.
it.
There are flumps, and you can always trust a flump.
No, you can't.
Yes, you
What?
can.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can.
No, you can't.
Totally can trust a flump. It's fine.
No.
I'll show you a
I
picture.
played
later.
this game, and you can't trust anything.
Yeah, you can totally
No.
trust the flump.
You trusted about like a
I
fake.
trust nothing.
Shoot first.
Yeah. Some of the lore, particularly when it comes to the history, and the history of Faerun deals a lot with its very active pantheon of gods, dragons and giants that we talked about
Oh, yeah.
before, the rise and fall of the elves, and then the eventual rise of humanity, dwarven cultures, and how they all interact in present day. And so those are the things: map, culture, history, governments, commerce, magic and technology, monster types, and then the lore. So we've got
And then there's Katie.
well, no, we got those 9 major points.
God said, let there be
10.
Thank you.
9 major points to keep an eye on when it comes to creating your world settings or expanding a world setting for play in a tabletop role-playing game.
And so, and this list will be on I Want to Be a GM on our Facebook page. Look at the files tab, and this will be there very shortly. as well as some of these others. 4-page simple write-up on how to build a city, county, country, and on to the world, because it just starts building from there.
Different tips and tricks to make the getting started a little easier. Once you have a framework, it's not too bad, but sometimes it's difficult to get started.
Making that framework is probably one of the both most rewarding and most frustrating aspects of being the DM.
Yeah, and that's what we're hoping to, not only show off the world settings, but help provide that framework for those ambitious game masters.
You kind of need to figure for yourself anyway, where's the line where I'm not going to cross this line, because that's, to me, that's too much work that I'm trying to build something for my players to play in, where I can buy this kick-ass book and it's got it all done for me. I just need to add a thing here and there to make it mine. Or do I want to build something from scratch? And we've met some guys the last couple of years. That's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
For the last 2 years, building a world from scratch.
Oh, yeah.
And they're great. They're awesome.
Shout out to Ben. His world setting is meant for an isekai style anime-inspired adventure.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Using the Anime 5e from a Kickstarter group. So it's hard it's not hard, but it's not necessarily appropriate to take Forgotten Realms or something else and modify it. So he's like, I need a new world, and I'm gonna have to jump right in. He spent the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We've seen him through 2 major revisions of his maps.
Yeah.
He's changed at least one culture, and once he got a hold of the printed material, he's like, crap, I gotta go do a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right, because we kept showing how different things are interconnected.
Right.
And if you make this change on this map, well, now those people can't live there anymore.
Right.
And if they can't live there anymore, then this culture is going to be changed. And if that culture changes, well, now that affects how the commerce works on this other piece. And he goes, okay.
It's like knocking down a line of dominoes.
It is.
It was. And then
once you understand how all these different features are interconnected, you just have to jump in and start building it.
And so it's a lot of fun. We're excited for, he's getting into the playtesting phase, actually. So we're excited to hear about how that goes. But if you're watching, we fully support it. We're glad to see that you're making progress there, buddy. But we want to talk now specifically. We appreciate you being here, Katie. So, yay!
Thanks, guys.
I know it's much rejoicing.
Yes.
Our
first
guest speaker.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Was he a guest speaker, or was he?
He came on as a guest during the Halloween special, and then we sort of adopted him.
Yeah, that's what happens. You feed the stray cat; it keeps coming back.
But I want to sort of open up everything for you and let you talk a little bit about the novel series and how that was an influence, how long you've been playing, just sort of your thoughts on GMing, where the game's at, just whatever you've got going on. We'd like to hear from you. Sure. You run a lot of games at Haven, which is a local game store.
Yeah, I do.
Stay really, really busy. And I know the community really appreciates that, and we're glad to have you with us today. So just tell us a little bit about it.
So when I first got introduced to Forgotten Realms, as I said earlier, I got introduced via the Crystal Shard. And this book was kind of revolutionary to me. I hadn't really dove into any sort of like heavy fantasy prior to it. And the concept of the struggles of Icewind Dale and the struggle to live in such a harsh environment to maintain not only your friendships, but also to maintain any sort of livelihood. It was an interesting story to challenge and think about. And then when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with friends, we started off in Waterdeep. And when we started off in Waterdeep, we kind of brushed some of the events of the Crystal Shard.
Yeah. Because that's actually a trilogy that is pretty expansive.
It is. And it goes all across the Sword Coast. And so it kind of made me feel like the whole thing was tied together really well. And then I started getting more into more of the books. I started diving into more of the lore and more of the history. And I started looking at it not just as a player, but as a person who was like, well, maybe I'll run one of these games one of these days, and, you know, maybe I'll find somebody that'll want to play. And then Haven opened up, and I was like, you guys got room for gaming? And they're like, yeah, that's what we're for. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so then it just kind of snowballed, and I'm running a lot of games. And when I'm building, when I'm building, say, the settlements, the towns, and the villages,
What?
this book, Spectacular Settlements,
Spectacular.
has been one of the
Splendiferous.
best investments I've ever made. It covers everything from your tiniest of villages to your largest of fortresses. And you can get pretty much anything you want.
I'm not giving this back.
Hey, you better give that back. I need that. I'm still generating stuff. But it
I'll
has
send you a PDF.
it has random tables of, you know, the condition that this settlement is in. It has tables of what they are primarily trading, what their resources in general are, where they're located. And a lot of it, like, say, I'm placing stuff in the Forgotten Realms, and I'm like, okay, I know this particular village is going to be in between Baldur's Gate and Elturiel. So they're kind of in the heartland, so they're going to be a grain culture, or they're going to be livestock. And I can go, okay, so I can already check those boxes off, and they have a worksheet that you can go through and neatly fill out every detail about the settlement, and then write up a summary of it.
So yeah, resources like this are huge for game masters.
Oh yeah.
And you know, that's part of the reason why we put what we put together. You know, the handouts and the workshops that we do. But they've got settlements, and I thought I saw another one where it was monsters or something.
So
or dungeons.
They have, so this company is Nord Games,
Right?
And they have the Spectacular Settlements. They have a book, Treacherous Traps.
There we go.
They have two different horde bestiaries, which break down. One breaks down undead, and it breaks down the different types of undead, different motivations for undead. There's a whole section dedicated to skeletons. I get excited when I think about it. It's so much fun because there's so many different types. There's skeletons that are just, you know, your basic shambling remains. There are skeletons that are your heavily armored juggernauts.
Oh yes.
And they break it down, and they give you not only the stats for these skeletons, not only the stats for these monsters, but the reason that they're where they are.
Nice.
There's a book, one of them, so it's the Horde, I think it's the Dreaded Curse that is the undead, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one. But the second one has like goblins and kobolds and gnolls.
Oh yes, gnolls aren't something you see much, but they're
gnolls are just a gnoll, just a regular gnoll.
They eat things.
They eat a lot of things. They eat everything. Don't leave your children unattended.
Dingo gonna get it.
Yeah, pretty much. They are they separate them into different types. So there are plains, there are Arctic, there are forests, so on and so forth, of the gnolls, the goblins, and why they're in the different regions and how the different regions affect them.
Right, how they've adapted for those areas and that stuff.
Habitat is very important.
It's really cool to see it broken down in the books. And then they also have towns and taverns. They have a town and tavern generator that gives you shops. And
that's the other one that I've seen. There's a shops one, yeah. So it's like the Wanderers shops and their wares or something.
Yeah. And it's one of those really helpful ones that really just, I don't know what this shopkeep's gonna have. Open the book. Hey, there's the tale of what this type of shop would have. Let's roll and see. Okay, they got 2 of these, 3 of these, and 4 alchemical whatchamacallits, and we're gonna roll with it. And stuff like that makes DMing a lot easier.
Do you have any advice for people that are looking to get into making this move behind the screen?
Biggest advice is be prepared to dedicate at least some time to figuring out your world. If you don't understand what the motivations for the big bads are, because you don't understand what the state of the world is around, then you're not going to have a good, clear idea of what's going on and what's happening and why it's happening. The other thing is leave room for your players to be players. They're
Rule
going to
number
be
2.
silly.
You're not writing a novel.
You are not writing a novel.
So for us, that's rule number 2, and that is players will never do what you expect them to.
Yep.
You know, even when you're dealing with a pre-printed module, there's always some word that the writer, you know, you read the paragraph of description, and they're like, oh, what's that thing? Like, that is
Squirrel.
nothing.
It is
Like,
a
you need to go,
descriptor.
like, it is the word blue. Leave it alone.
I have had players get hung up on descriptor words before.
Yeah.
What is the main? What is the sign?
You could
made
have
of?
players.
We ran a
You begin
workshop.
to run a module,
Yeah.
and the player in Schult, and then the players want to go to the Sword Coast. So
Right.
then you run a module about dragons, and the players ditch the dragon module, and now you're having to build up a political campaign from scratch. Connor.
One of our workshops, the party is supposed to go to a tavern and there's a wanted poster.
Right.
Take the wanted poster and go get the guy.
Yeah, super
They
straightforward.
spent the whole 30 minutes of our workshop in the tavern questioning people about the guy. I was like,
That's a player for you.
they
And
never left the bar. They never left the bar.
it's not necessarily a
It's decent
bad
role-play.
thing. But that's why I like random generated tables to have on hand. And I also have, and I didn't think to bring it, a couple of books that have random encounters and random NPCs.
Mhm.
And those books are also very helpful for when those moments when the players are like, hey, what's your name? And they're like, you're just like, Billy Joe Bob, that's my name, sure is.
I once had.
Two books right there.
Yeah.
I once got
Yeah, these ones.
so
The Game
sick of my
Masters.
players, and I lost my temper. I was like, the guards are Dave 1 and Dave 2. I gave you this NPC, talk to them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So-
The squirrels.
Oh, for sure. So, that's some good advice.
Talk to
Definitely,
the
you know, when it comes to getting ready to make that move, when you feel you're comfortable, that prep, you have to be comfortable
Right.
in your setting as well as the rule system, or you'll find that you'll have a hard time. You'll stumble. You won't feel confident. And there's a lot of material, as we've shown with the Forgotten Realms.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you focus on just the one area you're going to be in, if you're running Dragon Heist, for example,
Mhm.
that module gives you the background you need to be in Waterdeep to run Dragon Heist. So make sure you just read it and you're comfortable with it.
Read the entire thing before you start running it, because a lot of times the modules will have twists and turns and you're just sitting here going, wait, I didn't see that coming, and we went,
Yeah.
oops. Especially if you
Yes.
let the players kill someone who isn't supposed to be dead yet.
Read the module,
Oh no!
back to front.
Sometimes
That's,
yes.
yeah.
Who is dead here but wasn't dead here?
Right.
Who's the main villain? Because sometimes the module won't tell you who the twist villain is until the very
Well,
end.
that's like Waterdeep, Dragon Heist. It does have multiple different potential villains.
Yeah, you choose who the bad guy
You
really
choose
is.
who the bad guy is, and so there are different seasons, and for every season that you choose to start in, so let's say we start in the summertime, the villain for summertime is different than the villain for winter. And if you mess that up and cross those wires,
It won't
you're gonna be real confused on what's going on.
So, of the modules or content that you've seen and played in, do you have a favorite?
Module wise, I do a lot of games at Haven that are standalone. I do a lot of one-shots. So I prefer the Candlekeep Mysteries
Okay.
because it's an anthology of one-shots. They're all centered around Candlekeep,
Okay.
but they are individual. And you can, here you go, here's a game.
Right, you take a chapter and that's your thing.
Yeah. There's only one chapter in there that I'm like, you're gonna take some elbow grease. Let's skip.
Well, to your point, we've got a couple other books that are like that.
Mhm.
So I think Through the Radiant Citadel has a little bit of that.
Yep, that's
And
a good
then,
anthology.
Keys, what was it? Keys to the Vault.
Keys to the Golden Vault.
Yes, Keys to the Golden Vault. Those are heist themed adventures.
Yes.
So you get 12 of those if you want to, go and steal the golden idol kind of stuff.
dun, dun.
Don't
So
forget
if you're not ready to jump into a campaign book, check out some of those books for
Right.
your one-shot adventures. They work well in game store settings or smaller, runtimes.
Smaller. You can also find at like Drive Through RPG or the Guild Masters you can find one-shots that are smaller, almost like bite-sized games.
Right.
And those are really handy for running games in a store.
Okay.
Because they're small, they're quick, they're condensed.
Cool. So I'm gonna get up from the table. I help Mr. Producer. We're gonna switch a camera. But Troy was really excited earlier. You brought something kind of special.
I did.
And so
Do I need to move?
yeah, just a sec. Okay. What was the? I think the finished product was in this stack of books here, Troy.
So, this is thanks to my father.
All right.
Give
me a sec here. I'm coming around. Sorry, kicking all the stuff.
He loaned me his set from the gray box, the campaign set, the original Forgotten Realms, and with it, he was gifted, when his friend gave him this campaign set, a partial draft. And once you get...
Whoa.
Nope, it didn't really.
Oh, we're still in the air.
Yeah.
Once you get that going, I can show you, or tell you about it a little bit more.
Well,
May I have the...
so tell us about the adventure there, Troy.
Which adventure?
The one that she's got the partial draft with.
Oh,
That one.
that one.
Yep.
What is that?
So we have the partial draft for the Runes of Zentil Keep. The draft that we have is the chapter, the history of Zentil Keep.
Zentil Keep.
So what do you
everyone.
mean it's a partial draft? What is that?
She has a copy. It's not a copy.
It is the draft.
It is the draft that the author sent in for publication.
Of a chapter from this book.
From this, which is printed.
1988.
It may have been first print 88. This shows 95.
Yeah.
A while back. So it's a draft. It's not the draft. Well, it is the draft.
It is the draft.
It is the draft
Yeah.
by the author sent in for publication of the history from this.
And specifically the author, I believe, if I'm not wrong, was Ed Greenwood. For the draft for the information that we have.
So Ed Greenwood, if we remember from our first bit, he was the original author and creator of Forgotten Realms. So he would know. You would think what's going on.
All right, Mr. Producer, let's cue this up and I'll show this off back here.
Think we're ready for a big camera switch? What was that?
This is Stormtrooper.
It's a stormtrooper.
It's a stormtrooper.
Stormtrooper died.
Stormtrooper
What does
died.
they do?
All right, everyone. You sound a little different here on camera. I'm on the back side of our camera and microphone setup. I apologize. But you can see July 88, Triple E number 4, Zenthil Keep. Elminster's Ever-Winking Eye number 4, A Wayfarer's Guide to the Forgotten Realms by Ed Greenwood. And a look at Zenthil Keep. The richest and most powerful of the cities of the Moonsea area is Zenthil Keep. And here we go. We just get started through it.
And it's not just one page.
No,
It's roughly 58 pages
Roughly.
worth.
Roughly.
I don't remember if it was all of it or not, but that is what we had gifted.
Well, that's a pretty
How
awesome
did you
gift.
acquire that?
Will you sit down?
So
She just said gifted.
my father has a friend who was a writer for TSR. He was a writer and editor, and he gifted my father the campaign box set and that draft.
Wow. I don't know anybody nearly that cool. So what she's showing off here is that proof that we picked the right person to do Forgotten Realms with.
Yes, we certainly do.
So she brought us part of not the Holy Grail, but definitely something out of the Ark of the Covenant from the Forgotten Realms.
It's just a really cool thing to
absolutely.
certain people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, my mom wouldn't give you 2 cents for it. You know?
But for the right people, it's kind of one of those things of, what are you doing with this? Why is this here?
Yeah, that's definitely an awesome piece of history.
Yeah.
Hey, Troy, let me grab those books from you. Hand them to Mr. Producer.
So I went through, I have a PDF format of the Runes of Zentil Keep, the actual published piece. And I went through and I compared it to the draft that's in that box. And I found that the chapter on the history of Zentil Keep lines up almost perfectly to the information in the draft.
Nice.
It was a lot of reading, just so you know, reading the same thing twice, but with slight differences.
Was there anything cut from the draft?
Or cut from the book?
There were a few things that I saw changed or cut, mostly extra explanation of like the Prince of Manchun, and a couple of areas where it kind of talks about some of the history. The draft goes in a little bit further than the book does, which I found interesting, and it's kind of like having a secret extra history in that draft.
There you go.
Yeah, because you could use that and nobody could dispute it.
Yeah.
It's like, but that's not what it is. And you go, I beg to differ. I have the original right here. Should I read?
It's neat. I thought you guys might like to see it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely huge thanks for bringing that.
Yeah.
Obviously, everybody here is envious of your item.
Not mine. It is my father's.
Well, make sure you get home with it safely, because that's obviously very cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Thanks for bringing it.
Thank
and
you.
sharing it with us. I know these nerds love it.
Thanks for inviting me out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when we were putting all these together,
Come on back.
first thing we had to do was debate what world settings we wanted to do, and we said very quickly, well, ones that came out when we started playing were ones that have been re-released, because we wanted to show people how these world settings have changed in keeping with what we did last year, and how the game itself changed over the years.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, we got to do Forgotten Realms first, because it's in everything. So like, okay, so hey, we got to get a guest DM to come on and talk about it too. Well, who would that be? And very quickly, Matt said, Kate from Haven. I think she plays it all the time. So you think she would want to come on? No, maybe.
If we have time.
So just letting you know, your check should clear next week.
Yeah,
Wait, we're gonna.
Where's more catfish?
No.
I'll take more fish.
More
That's because
catfish.
she's the guest DM, and you
Yeah.
just happened to come with me today.
You didn't even buy my food.
No, I didn't. I asked you, and you said no.
Oh, I don't. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about.
Careful.
So,
It makes it a date.
pew. All right. Well, I think we're all set for the day. Anybody's got any final words on Forgotten Realms?
I'm very confused.
Very confused. You play Savage Worlds, and
Yeah,
that's
completely different system.
completely different.
And when I played Forgotten Realms, quote unquote, I did what I wanted to do with very little googling. I was like, okay, hey, a map with names. That's all I need.
I think one of the greatest resources about the Forgotten Realms is its extensive amount of work that's been put into
But
it.
there's a huge one. When I went on the internet so we could get some background to put this together. So,
Almost too much.
oh my Lord.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. I found a write-up on it that was probably 12 pages long. He found up another one that put that one to shame.
This is my write-up, and I stopped halfway through our list of 9 points because I was like, that's too much information.
Well, okay, so the notes that I left at home
Yeah.
was turning into something even longer than what your page there,
Yeah.
your booklet there is, because I was going into a deep dive, like, okay, this information, then I stopped and I'm like, they probably don't want to listen to me talk for 4 hours about nothing but the events of the Sundering and different eras.
See, when I was doing Forgotten Realms, I ran for someone like you, and they kept actuallying me. So I told them to shut up because I didn't care.
So, but I think ultimately, if someone's thinking about making the move to behind the screen, they're going to GM a game, definitely take a look at the Forgotten Realms. There's a lot of information that's going to be available to you to help you get into the world setting, get comfortable. It's going to do a lot of the work that you would need to do otherwise, so that you can focus on running the game and telling your story.
I think what I like about it is that there is a truckload of stuff out there,
Mhm.
different material that you can put into a game. But there's still so much that's open that you can develop yourself.
Oh yeah, that's the cool.
It's-
Yeah, none of it's closed ended. None of it's
No.
this is the thing. You know.
And if you don't want to play D&D, there's board games.
Oh, yeah, it's
So-
probably
forgot
there.
about so
So many board games.
There's-
there's board games, novels, 12 computer games.
Yeah, there's
How much does
so
that
much.
cost?
A lot.
You don't want to know.
I do want to know so I can decide whether or not I'm
So where
buying
you
it.
at?
Well, you can go to
So-
the internet.
This one.
Skip that decision and go straight to depressed.
Hold that.
So the scary part about this game is that there's the rule book, the regular rule book, and then the advanced rule book.
Oh, look at this guy.
I have never beaten anything in the regular rule book. So Eratu,
Oh, yeah.
Or that too.
Eratu, the Bowler,
Oh yeah.
focuses in the first book,
Nice.
the Crystal Shard. Literally the
Nice.
exact same character. It is so cool. But this game is so much fun, and it's all random tile generation. And so, like, if you want to play,
Mhm.
and you don't want to have to play like a big campaign, this is a box of tiles and interesting things to explore.
Look who I just found on the top of the disc. The deck here. Drow Ranger Drist O'Doran. Durin.
There's a D first before
That
the
guy.
But there's
Oh,
so much,
dude.
and some of the figures are painted, some of them aren't. Yes, rar. He's a lot of fun, but it's just such a cool
Here's a big sweetie.
system. But it is also, I would say, challenging if you aren't working in unison with the rest of your party.
Yeah.
Drider.
Drider.
Lots of ways to access Forgotten Realms. There's an MMO that Cryptic
The
currently
Panther,
has.
Winter.
There's several video games, tons of novels. The lore, the world setting, the heroes, the adventures are all very neat. And so if you're not running the system, if you're not your hero playing at a table, there's a lot of ways to access it if any of it sounded fun for you. So.
Thanks.
Thanks for bringing this
Oh no,
one,
he's got.
too.
Yep,
He's got some of the tiles.
Hey.
Those are important tiles.
What? I didn't do anything.
Not this time.
This time.
This time.
He's only trying to run off some of my stuff.
Just some of it.
And on that note, this has been Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realms, Forgotten Realms, or Faerun. I'm Jester Borris with I Want to Be a GM, joined today by...
Quinn the Fighter.
Troy the Planescape guy. And our lovely
Boss
guest,
Katie.
Boss Katie.
Yep.
Who's here
Find her
on
on
our Discord.
Discord and
Yes.
Haven Games. You can also find us on Discord, YouTube.
You got me on the order now.
Yeah, come on. You can do it, Troy.
We're on Twitch, Discord, YouTube, and Facebook. I Want to Be a GM. You can find us on all those platforms. Also, our .com, which has a calendar of events, as well as other things that we're doing everywhere. Be sure and join us. You can go to Facebook. I Want to Be a GM. In the Files tab, we have handouts there that you can click on and get free to hopefully help you with your game. Join us on Discord. We have a growing population of DMs that are putting together all kinds of fun stuff. Join
Love
us
chatting
there.
with those
We can help
guys.
you with your game. You can help us with our game.
Yeah.
And just have fun with the whole thing.
So, again, thanks for joining us for D&D Through the Realms, Forgotten Realms. We'll see you next time.